Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sofia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self defense. This episode is brought to you by Big Tech's Ordnance, your soon to be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre and post sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their own staff to train with high level instructors to ensure that when you, as the consumer, reach out, you are taken care of. Today we have Greg Wong of Spartan 117GW. I'm so excited for this interview. I got to see Greg again this past SHOT Show 2024. We got to reconnect from SHOT Show 2023. And he is here today on the podcast to talk about his multifaceted career and hobbies. I'm so excited. Greg, I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners.
Sure. Thanks again for having me. Man, my history kind of goes back, probably just before the Army. When I really kind of started getting into firearms, I had like an uncle that he had guns, and I was still kind of like learning. I made that transition. I was a young kid from like Nerf over to Airsoft and learning about real guns. So Airsoft and a little bit of real guns was kind of my gateway. Obviously, growing up in California, you didn't really have access even back then in the early 2000s to like really cool firearms per se, but just shooting a couple AR-15s was good enough to kind of like, get me interested really. And then I really got into Airsoft very heavily because it's a very cool, fun, competitive space. There's different aspects to it, like many hobbies. Like some people are really into the gear, or some people are really into military history, some people are just really into the guns, and some people kind of love building really cool, wacky combos of different guns. And you kind of see that mirrored on the real steel side as well. But one thing that I thought was cool is I kind of fell into the history part the most, and then started that, did airsoft for a while, then ended up joining the Army. Was in the Army for 6 years, active to reserve with the 82nd Airborne Division, 78 Signal Battalion in Japan, which was cool. And I actually picked Japan when they gave me an option to get stationed overseas. I picked Japan specifically because well, one, that's like where Airsoft was born. So I was like, well, I know I'll be able to play Airsoft there. So
That's awesome.
plus it's Japan. Japan's super cool.
Of course.
So yeah, went to Japan for a few years and had a lot of fun playing Airsoft, like almost as many weekends as I could. Then came back and was stationed at Bragg again with 112 Signal Battalion in USASOC, and then got out. Came to LA and then kind of whenever you make that transition, it's always an interesting transition, but did the reserve thing for a while, but then went head first, full time into the airsoft industry. So that's kind of how I started really breaking into the firearms industry. Was through airsoft, oddly enough, and just learning a lot through that, just from going to events and doing things. Even though you didn't see a lot of the big firearms brands out at airsoft events, I was very fortunate to have a boss that was really, really well known or tied into the real gun side. So that way I was always aware of what was going on the real steel side, because a lot of people that just do airsoft, they kind of fall into that bubble where they only know what's going on there. But I was lucky to kind of be exposed to that. And then through doing that and being in love with video games, ended up working on a couple different consulting gigs. I worked on Ghost Recon. I did some gaming stuff for Battlefield. I've worked on Call of Duty. And then after that, I worked on a couple different TV shows. Like I did some background stuff on SWAT. I worked on Christopher Nolan's Tenet. And then, yeah, I did Ghost Recon commercial after that. And then, so I was able to dabble around working on a couple different commercials, kind of combining the things that I loved, which was like gear, history, filmmaking, video games. It was kind of like LA was kind of perfect for that. Up until COVID, and then of course, like after COVID, I was like, all right, I need to move to like a free state so I can enjoy my rights again. And then Haley Strategic brought me out to Scottsdale, Arizona, where I've been ever since, and kind of went through like a renaissance with some of my channels, some of my content. And then that first year was like more just trying to acclimate to Arizona, and the second year was kind of like I really took a re-education into filmmaking, into lighting and stuff, which is how I kind of built this. And then the last year recently was really digging into the content creation side with firearms. So now I'm like making a lot more gun content now, which is great. And Arizona is perfect for that. But I still do my airsoft stuff, and I just went to an event the other weekend. But yeah, I still like to stay tied to my roots. I'm not going to leave that behind. A lot of people like to go to guns, but then they'll like downplay airsoft. Either they never played airsoft, or if they make that jump, they're like they're too good for airsoft anymore. Like
Mm.
I'm never going to be too good for airsoft. There's so many positive things about that hobby, that sport, and what it can be done. Like it's just, I think it's funny that there's a lot of guys in the gun industry that like to hide that they play airsoft, or try to not erase their history, but they don't talk about it as much anymore because they feel like it makes them stigmatized or somehow that they play with
Mm.
toy guns. I'm like, no, playing with toy guns is awesome.
Right.
You get amazing force on force training with that. So like I have a lot of people in the gun industry who hit me up all the time like, hey man, my kid's getting into airsoft, or hey man, I want to learn how to train with airsoft guns. What do you suggest? So there's a lot more cross pollination now, and there's still some stigma, but the barriers have been broken down enough, just through a lot of more reputable people using, training, or playing with airsoft, that like the communities are overlapping more. And I also try to tell people on the airsoft side that they need to kind of cross pollinate with the gun side more. It's just better to be of both houses than just to be of one. And, eventually, I always equate the airsoft industry as like the estuary, and the gun industry is the
Mm.
ocean. Eventually, you got to get out of the estuary, go swimming in the ocean, but don't be afraid to come back and check out what's going on in the old stomping ground. So that's kind of my history in a nutshell. But just luckily, by working with the right people, I've been able to do a little bit of everything that I've kind of wanted to do within that space, whether it was movies, video games, filmmaking, airsoft, and gun stuff. So it just was able to check all the boxes, really.
Oh my goodness. I was just making a list of the responses. First of all, thank you for your service. I meant to
Oh,
say that when we first hopped on, but just want to make sure we say that today. Thank you so much for your service to our country. Um, Everything you just said was so interesting. I had a little bit of imposter syndrome, like, oh my God, am I going to be able to ask him, good enough questions to really get down to your experiences? But I've so many. So I'd love to start with airsoft. That is a perspective we've yet to have on She Shield, and one that I'm not very familiar with. So as far as the stereotypes you talked about, the stigma that's associated with them, what are some of the main stigmas out there currently, and how do you feel like you're fighting that right now with your
I
page?
mean, there's still people that are like, oh my God, you like to play with toy guns. Like, I mean, I do, because like, man, you can only learn so much from the flat range, and like, it's just,
Right.
I love it because you get put in so many different situations that you have to problem solve through. And at the end of the day, you're basically sparring with guns, right? Like, if you never
Right.
spar, you're never gonna know.
Yes.
You're never gonna know what you're capable of. You're never gonna know what your decision making is like. And yes, you can absolutely game airsoft, and like most of the events, even the hardcore ones, there's aspects of it that you can game. But I mean, like, if you're, I mean, it's just a different type of training. It doesn't replace anything. Like, I don't know why people think that airsoft has to replace other types of training. It's like they don't.
Mm.
Training is like a pie where you have different aspects, and like to really have a full um full view or full spectrum of training, you should really try a little bit of everything. Like, you're going to learn stuff from
Right.
competition shooters, you're going to learn stuff from airsofters, you're going to learn stuff from military guys and doing CQB and whatnot, and you'll find that all the roads kind of lead to the same place. So there's really, I think it's funny and childish that people would even talk down in airsoft, because there's a couple reasons too. It's like airsoft is basically the new BB gun.
Mm.
Everyone back 30, 40, 50 years ago grew up with a BB gun, then got a real gun. Now you just have airsoft guns, and they're cooler, in my opinion. And they come in way more flavors, shapes, and forms. Like, a lot of the guns behind me are kind of airsoft guns and a couple real guns, but a lot more variety. And it's just another aspect of but I think whether you're into it for the cosplay aspect or you just like the history of it, it's a great way to get people into guns, and it's extremely safe. So like, whether people come to it for a training purpose or people come to it just because they think it looks cool because they saw it in a video game or something, that's still getting people's like toes dipped into the pond of learning about firearms. Like to me, I see
Absolutely.
all those avenues of getting people toward the same goal, which and it's man, there's so much legislation trying to go after airsoft because they know, especially with the licenses now, because they know that it's kind of marketed toward the future, the youth, the generations. But I'm like, I mean, that's what we need. Um, and also, like, I'm trying to remember, there was like one more point, but I mean, part of it too is like, it doesn't make sense to mock the people that want to be you. I think Travis Haley said it best. Like, because obviously he's gone up through the whole military pipeline and been very successful in the gun industry. But dude, there's a lot of airsofters that like when they came in airsoft, they just want to be those people. They want to be in the military. They want to be a gun instructor or something like that, or survivalist. So it doesn't make any sense for those people to mock the people who are basically going to be replacing you in 10, 15 years. Um, and like it's an extension of the gun industry, especially now. So
Mm,
I think people
yeah.
have tried to separate the two, but there's really no separating the two now. Especially with the licenses and everything, it's just they're so intertwined, and I think it's something that we as the gun industry should embrace because there's
Mm.
so many. I've heard this story a bunch of times. You'd be surprised how many families have kids where like the parent is like well known in the gun industry or does a lot of firearm stuff, but for some reason maybe their kid was just because they were oversaturated with guns growing up, they just weren't interested into it. But
Mm.
airsoft was that gateway where it was like they got invited to like a birthday with one of their best friends playing airsoft, and they discovered how much fun it was, and boom, they're in. They're invested now, and now they want to do it and learn about it, and they're like, oh, now they get it that they didn't get before, because obviously when you just deal with real guns growing up, it's a little different because there's just different safety aspects you have to take into account. You don't get that competitive, I mean, you might get the competitive stuff from competition shooting, but you're not going to get that like that feeling of sparring in a ring, if you will, with another human being like you do with force on force. And airsoft is 100% about force on force most of the time. So kids feel that competitive edge and they're like, wow, this is awesome. And then that ends up being the hook. And then next, people get into it. So I think the stigma has, maybe it's not completely gone away, but it's definitely better now than it was 5, 10 years ago. Where,
Okay.
people were like, oh, you're just an airsoft or whatever. Some people let that get to them. I was like, I mean, you could think I'm just an airsofter, but I mean, I was in the army most of the time when I was doing it too. So I always had that to kind of like, I was like, well, I'm just doing this just because I like it for fun. But I think most people have gotten past that. There's still some
Mm.
people that have the stigma for it, but I think people are much more keen to the advantages now. And the way I tell people this day is like, hey, man, we're all in the same boat. We only got one. We're all for the Second Amendment. And if this is going to get more people into the Second Amendment, then I'm all for it. I mean, I came from that community. So what does that tell you? I mean, there's so many people in the military and special operations units now that started off as airsofters
Mm.
that worked their way up and now they're in the gun industry, like tons of people now. So the culture that kind of grew up being stigmatized is now at that age where they're in the gun industry now working. I mean, there's so many different people I bump into in the gun industry, like in the gun industry. They're like, oh, I watched your airsoft videos when I was like in high school or something like that. So those people are
Nice.
now in the industry or they're in the military and they're the new generation. I think that's part of why the stigma has gone away, because like that's the new generation. The new generation is here. Like, I mean, I'm kind of part of that. I guess I don't know if it's the tail or the head end or whatever, but like same thing. Like I was in the airsoft
Mm.
industry, now I'm working in the defense industry. So we're here now. So I think that's kind of why it's gone away a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely appreciate this perspective. I did not know the story of the stigma behind it. I feel like a lot of it stems from ignorance because I mean, even myself until about a year ago, I didn't understand the use for airsoft in combatives. And I
Oh
know that when I
yeah, yeah.
trained, yeah, like that is very new to me.
It's huge for that. Like
Okay.
it's I think there's a couple different companies like Amtech Training uses airsoft for a lot of their combatives programs as well. It's just
Okay.
great because like with simulation and UTM, there's a lot of red tape around that. So
Right.
airsoft is very affordable. It's
Mhm.
very like you can go to any major airsoft store or airsoft website and buy what you need and have what you need to get some pretty good training
Mm.
for a couple $100, if that. And the ammos, the consumable portions are very easy to replace, which I think in the training side, I think that's part of how the stigma kind of went away, because they're like, wow, this is a great training tool. We're trying to save as much money as we can to teach these people, just because, like, it's not like they're rich. Instructors
Right.
really don't make that much money. They make enough to keep going around the country and train. And it's a great tool for force on force. It's like you just said, during combatives, it's great. I mean, sometimes it's cheaper than some of the other training guns that have more electronics in it. So it's a great tool.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions from there that kind of popped up. First of all, how do kids play with airsoft? I mean, I hope I'm showing how little I know about this, but how do they, like, when you said play, what do they
Yeah.
do?
I mean, like everyone grew up back in the day playing like backyard airsoft, but now there's
Okay.
much more of an ecosystem with like there's fields and events, like all sanctioned stuff. So you don't really have to
Mm.
do backyard airsoft anymore. Like when I was younger, like in high school or even before then, where people were just playing on land they didn't own and they'd get in trouble. But now there's a lot more. There's like real
Mm.
events, real places to go play, skirmish fields or paintball fields to go play at. So, I mean, basically, like if you're under the age of 18, usually you have to have a parent guardian or something like that with you, but you just go
Right.
to like a local field and you'll have everyone. I've seen people as young as 10, like as old as 50, a huge age range, going out playing, having a good time. It is huge with father-son combos. Like father-son
That's
combos
awesome.
are a lot. There's even some couple mothers that play too, but definitely
Love
see
it.
father-son duos a lot. It's like, honestly, if you're a dad or a parent out there and you want to have some bonding time with your kids, this is a great way to get them off the couch, get them off the iPad, teach them some real
Mm.
skills, have some fun doing it, learn through pain and attrition. It's a lot of fun.
Right.
And of course, like some of the national level events are way more intense, so you probably
Okay.
want to be an adult for those, because like
Mm.
you're sleeping outside, you're like surviving for a day to a couple days at a time. But
Interesting.
most
Okay.
places, like here in Phoenix, we got VIP Airsoft. It was a bowling alley turned into an airsoft field, so kids can just
So
show up
cool.
with their parents. The parents will drop them off, and they'll play for a couple hours, and they'll come pick them up. Obviously, like the airsoft gun is a little bit more dangerous, but everyone's got
Hmm.
iPro and face masks
Right.
and stuff, so there's like a level of safety that everyone takes and makes it pretty straightforward.
That's incredible. And what are some benefits to airsoft guns compared to like paint projectiles? I know at like ShivWorks we use these like small blue
Yeah,
projectiles.
it could, maybe you're using like not a pepper gun, but there are a couple
Oh.
other guns that have marking munitions, as you would call them.
Hmm.
Airsoft's just cheaper. Like there are
Okay.
some guns, like Unit Solutions has a gun, has a rifle. It's actually, I got one over there.
Nice.
It shoots a 8 millimeter non-marking. It's kind of like an 8 millimeter airsoft gun, but built a little bit more robustly for training, because like at the end of the day, airsoft guns are kind of toyish in nature. Like they're not.
Okay.
Even though we use them for training, they were never really purpose built for training. They were more for
I see.
wargaming than anything.
Okay.
So it's like, it's still a hobby toy, but has training use.
Mm.
But so a couple companies took that idea and tried to re-engineer it so it was more training friendly, so it was harder to break. Because frankly,
Okay.
like people who are into a hobby know the details and nuances of how this thing works. Where you hand this thing to a cop who's never seen an airsoft gun before, it's like, all right, you need to clear this building and find the hostage. He just needs it to work, and he's going to use it like how he
Right.
uses his real gun, which is probably going to beat it up. so,
Right.
um,
Absolutely.
so like, and then like I said, though, there's guns out there that do marking and non-marking, and like that's the biggest thing. Marking's wonderful if you're doing more regimented force on force training and you're running like training lanes at like a school or a shoot house or something like that, because then you could really like, okay, you got hit here and you got hit there. If you don't have the budget for that, non-marking is totally fine. Not to say
Interesting.
you're not going to get as much value at it, but there's just some advantages to marking munitions, but there's also like cost disadvantages, and plus like,
Mm.
whenever you use marking munitions, you got to worry about your clothes getting messed up and getting paint over everything. So people like non-marking, and it's also safer for the building that you're training in terms of there's
Oh.
just less cleanup. Instead of a dent, you have a dent and paint when you use marking munitions.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
so in airsoft, you tend to find that a lot of those lower velocity training weapons like airsoft or uh, what's it called? They basically it just doesn't damage the area as much, so that you're allowed to train in more places. Where if you use sim or UTM, you're kind of limited
Mm.
because a lot of places don't want their facility getting shot up. Like especially if it's not a true training facility, it's like a bank or a school or some restaurant or whatever you're
Mm.
using for training. More sensitive to that kind of thing. So that's what airsoft is great in because it has less likelihood of causing permanent damage.
That is so interesting. And I'm curious, when did you start getting into, you said you kind of described it before we started the episode as getting into steel, like at the
Oh, real
transition
steel, yeah.
from real
I mean,
steel.
I've
Yes.
always been into real guns, but probably
Okay.
around 20, maybe it was after 2016 or something like that. I started
Okay.
man, when did I buy my first gun? Maybe it was like 2018 or 2019. No, it must have been like
Okay.
2017, 28. But I bought my first gun in California. It was like a Glock 19X, which I still have to this day. And then
Nice.
I got myself an AR-15 and then, got myself some ammo and I was like, all right, now I can finally like do this. Um, so for me, it was like I did airsoft for a long time and got gas blowback guns, which operate very similar to a real firearm. But
Okay.
eventually it was like, it's time to make that jump just because it's just cooler and I kind of want to learn about that. And you definitely like, when you look into the gun world and you see how good people are, you're like, okay, we we enjoy ourselves with airsoft, and like obviously tactics are a little bit more important for some of the bigger events. But when it comes to individual firearms training and manipulation, I'm like, man, some of those guys at the real gun side are really good, and I want to get that good because there
Mm.
wasn't that many people taking it that seriously on the airsoft side. Like they're taking the like the LARP or the the cosplay side seriously in airsoft, but they weren't taking
Right.
the training side very seriously. So that's why I was like, okay, I need to invest myself a little bit more in that and bring that back. Because even to this day, like if you looked at the largest like airsofters in the country by subscribers or whatever, like they have huge channels and stuff, but you put a real gun in their hands and they're really not that great. Like
That's what I
they
was
just
going to ask.
don't have like as much of the training. Like they know how to shoot a gun, they know how to shoulder a gun, they know how to use a gun, but there's just so many factors like the recoil management,
Yeah.
mechanics of the weapon, because most airsoft guns are electric, so you don't have to work as much of the mechanics. Now, handguns a
Mm.
little different because they're all gas guns basically. And there's some gas blowback rifles, and a lot of people will learn how firearms work with some of those more realistic replicas. But predominantly, most of the airsoft guns, mostly M4s, are electric. So you really
Mm.
only have to manipulate one thing or two things, which is the safety and the trigger. But on a real firearm, there's a couple more mechanical things that happen that a lot of these guys just don't get to do very much or don't get time to master because they're not doing it when they do that. So for me, getting into real steel was kind of the curiosity of like, well, obviously I like shooting guns. Shooting guns is a lot of fun and it's a good skill to have. But I was like, man, I am not as good at that as I thought I was. So I was like, okay, I need to learn more about that and get better at that. And to this day, that's still like, it's just a much more challenging thing to master than airsoft because there's just more skill involved. So I like to think it's good to have both sides because there's a lot of people, like I said, that only have mastered one but haven't mastered the other. You might have someone who's a really good shooter but doesn't know how to fight or react against like a enemy attacking opposing force. Or you might have one guy who's knows how to handle that but doesn't really know the ins and outs of how to manipulate this gun really well and is missing some things from the firearm side. So for me, it was kind of like the more I cross pollinate, and the more I do that, the better. And ultimately, I'll just be a more complete in terms of training, in terms of my knowledge, in terms of what I've mastered or what I'm trying to master. I just think it's more holistic than just
Mm-hmm.
trying to be one or the other. Plus, if you only do airsoft, then you kind of get um, bottlenecked or whatever. But it's like you kind of get
Mm.
stuck into being like just that. And it's like, well, I want to be more than
Right.
just that. So let me explore this side too. And I think that's part of the reason why I work so well with people in the gun industry is because like I was willing to take that leap and learn about that, but still retain my knowledge about airsoft. And then, when people from different camps have questions about the other, I can answer it as best I can.
Right. That's wonderful. Yes. And I really appreciate your holistic approach to that. It reminds me of the age old debate of competition shooting versus concealed carry versus weapons-based combatives, and it's like, what about all three? Like, what if we
Yeah.
took a little bit from
There's
each
nothing
one?
wrong with all of them. Yeah. You just take the best parts of
Absolutely.
each one and combine it. And I mean, it's no different. Like you look at people in the military, like in the military, shooting is just one thing you do. It's like, it's
Hmm.
kind of the job. Like it is the job to an extent when you think about what the job of a soldier really is. But then
Right.
when you look at it, like how often, like your average soldier, especially if they're non-combat arms, really doesn't shoot that much. Most of their job is everything else but shooting. Even in combat arms shooting, it's like they're shooting a lot, but are they getting really good deliberate practice kind of shooting, or they're just shooting however much ammo they're told to shoot, and they're doing the same thing over and over again and being taught the wrong thing. So it's like, I don't know, it's good to keep remembering that, like even special operations guys, like they shoot a lot, but that's just one skill they have to master. They might have to master, EOD, or might have to master jumping out of planes, or might have to master something else, or there's so many other skill sets involved, um, which is why like competition shooters are really good because that's like the one thing that they do, and so it's good to learn and pick and pull from that and take it back to your little camp where you've got all your ideas and all the training that you've done, and like, okay, just add a little bit more of this, add a little bit more of that. It's so that way you can speak to everything, but also you just have a better idea how to react to everything. If you've never done force on force, but you only did competition shooting, it's like, it's different. It's just different, It's different
Yes.
because you're not just fighting a target, you're fighting a person. The person has ideas and has tactics that they're going to use on you
Yes.
that you may never expect. So it's like, it's good to have both pictures, both sides of that, to be, just like I said, more holistic. Just have a better idea of what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that. And you're kind of making me reflect on my time at ECQC. And I bring this up in every episode because it was such a life changing, pivotal moment for my career path. But yeah, I remember being not a great shooter at all. And then going and taking ECQC. And I was so nervous pulling up to that class because my hand skills, my pistol skills were not great. And then on top of that, I was learning combatives. But I know if I went back now, someone who's been training with instructors in the competition realm and the combatives realm, if I were to go back, I would be less nervous and have to focus less on the kind of mechanics, and I get to
Hmm.
focus more on
More
the
technique. Yeah.
contextual
Yeah.
training. Yes,
Yeah. Technique.
absolutely. And so I love that you're bringing that up. That's such a great point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just part of like whenever you're learning the fundamentals, it's tough to like, so what we talk about at HSP a lot is there's like skill set, you have your foundation, then you have skill sets and tactics, and like people like to flip the pyramid all the time, but
Hmm.
basically it's like people will try to jump into a course that's more based on tactics or skill sets, but you still need to build the foundation. And so,
Yeah.
like, a lot of times people will go into an advanced course, but they might not have the foundation. And so then they're trying to like pick up the pieces and try to maintain that foundation. They won't retain as much of the really good skill set or techniques, tactical stuff, whatever, all the more advanced stuff. So, if you're able to master the foundation or go to a good solid foundational course, when you go to that advanced stuff, you'll retain much more of that because you're not, instead of learning how to fly the plane, you're like, okay, you already know how to fly the plane. Now you're like, okay, I need to think about this kind of positions or whatever maneuvers you want to do. Like way more, your window, your tunnel vision is so much bigger to where it's not tunnel vision anymore. You can see so much more and make better decisions. It's the same with anything. Like it's like when you first start driving and you're just trying to stay within the lines, and now you're like driving, listening to music, I don't know,
Yes.
looking at messages or something,
I
like
was about to
talking to
say it.
someone, or like, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
you're multitasking. Your
Yeah.
situational awareness is
Yeah.
much bigger and better. That's something anyone can relate to if you want to use an analogy. Like when you first start driving, you're just
Yeah.
trying to stay in the lines, but now
Yeah.
you're like checking the mirrors, like, oh yeah, I can squeeze in between those cars over there. So
Right.
you're
Yeah.
way more confident with your skills. It's no different, no matter
Mm,
what thing you do. Yeah.
absolutely. And I'm being selfish right now because I'm just so curious about this. How has Airsoft played into your consulting on video games and on the sets of movies?
I mean, so for that, a lot of that came into play with one, historical accuracy. And like for filmmaking, it's like you want 100%, but you're typically going to get 80, 60, 70, or 80 or something like that. And if you get anything
Okay.
80% and up is like gravy. Some companies are lucky
Awesome.
to get 50% of the way there. For me, it was kind of that perfect bridge because I knew about real guns, I knew about airsoft, I knew about history. So like companies like, we want to film this commercial, but the characters from this era. I was like, okay, so you're going to need this, like from a historical perspective, like you'll need this, 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 and this. But because I also knew where to source it from the real side or the airsoft side, I was like, okay, this is what you'll need. This is where you can get it. If you can't get it from Eastern or Western costumes, like you can get it from EVIC, or you can get it from Airsoft Extreme, or you can get it from PTS. You can get stuff close from this that close to that what you need. And it kind of was able to like help source stuff. Like I even to this day, every now and then, I'll message some of my friends at the costume house. It's like, hey, you should check out this new airsoft uniform that came out because we're probably going to be fighting those guys in a few years. You're probably going to want those for the bad guys, stuff like that. So it's like
Yeah.
there's always like stuff coming out, which like, a lot of these companies, like whether it's the prop warehouse companies or costuming companies or the actual production themselves, they don't really know what's
Mm.
right and what's wrong. Um, all they know is they need to put people in something. And that's why you see movie productions where the gear is terrible, is because they're going to put them in something. So
Mm-hmm.
if they're willing to listen, it's better to get them to work with them so you can get them the right stuff. And that's where, like, one of my friends, he's a costumer. I worked with him on the Ghost Recon commercial. He just did Oppenheimer, and then he also did Lioness. He did some stuff for SEAL Team. But Lioness looks great because he knows what to get and what to look for. And Airsoft has kind of been a hidden blessing for the film industry because back in the day, you had real guns, you kind of had dummy guns, but airsoft guns were so much more readily available. Plus, they actually had, the gas blowback ones cycle. They function, but it's not a blank firing gun. And blank firing guns have a lot of red tape. Like if you look at Army of Dead or a lot of major productions or John Wick or whatnot, a lot of those guns are airsoft guns because they'll just
Mm.
CGI the muzzle flash and all the surrounding effects in because it's so much safer. So that's kind of how the film industry has been using it. I'm still
Yeah.
a advocate for practical effects, whether it's a physical gun or I love blank fire in movies whenever they could do it because it's so much more visceral and whatnot. But I understand there's not always a budget for that. And of course, it's just inherently more dangerous than having an airsoft gun that's just cycling air and they could just CGI the effects after. So that's kind of
What
how
is
I
blank
kind of
fire?
a blank fire is like
Yeah.
basically you think of like a round, but instead of like or like yeah, a round, but instead of a bullet being at the end, the brass is like crimped. So it's still gonna have
Oh,
like an explosion and a fireball still coming out, but there's really no projectile. So
interesting.
and they
Okay.
they load it a certain way so there's just enough gas or depending on the gun how it's designed, but there's enough gas to cycle the gun. So that's what a blank firing gun is, and they're
Interesting.
not 100% safe. There's still like a minimum distance you're supposed to use blank fire guns, and there's
Okay.
different types of blank fire guns, but the most basic rudimentary blank fire guns typically have some kind of blank fire adapter on the barrel to push the gas down the gas tube, because otherwise the gas would just escape down the barrel. It pushes some of the gas down the gas tube to cycle the bolt so the gun can cycle, because that's what a
Mm.
bullet normally would do. A bullet would be in the
Right.
barrel, and the bullet would pass the gas tube, and the gas would be trying to get out of the barrel chasing the bullet, but it would have that extra pathway to go back either to push the piston or go down the gas tube and hit the bolt and cycle the gun again. So
I see.
that's
Hmm.
why you use blanks. The gun gets really dirty because you're just taking all that fouling and all that basically that carbon. It goes back in the gun. They get really dirty, and that's why
Right.
military guns, when you blank fire adapt them and you use them for training, they get really messy really fast, and they get gunked up
Interesting.
really quick. Versus like a real gun doesn't get as like a live fire gun when you're not using blanks doesn't get dirty as quick. But so that's just
Okay.
another way airsoft is used, and kind of how I got into it is just kind of like I said, I knew the history and kind of knew where to get the stuff, and yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell why airsoft is used in movies.
That's incredible. Oh my gosh, this is so interesting to me. And this is not to say I do not appreciate all of the guest speakers that have come on. We've had so many come on and talk about combatives and kind of like just concealed carry. This is just such a unique perspective. I love that you're combining all of these worlds, and we haven't even gotten to gaming yet. So
Oh yeah.
I'm so excited about this. This is not something I intended on asking you, but you just made me think of it. So do you know anything about the Alec Baldwin case
Yeah, a
going
little
on?
bit. Like I followed that a
Okay.
little bit. Yeah, I mean, basically it
Yeah.
was like like revolvers are different, right? Because
Okay.
revolver, it's like a purely mechanical gun, basically. It's like there's no gas that has to come back and cycle the gun. Like when
Okay.
you squeeze the hammer, it rotates the cylinder, right?
Right.
So it's very easy to mix blank and live ammo in there if you don't have it
Mm.
set up properly. And basically the armor was like a novice armor. She did a terrible job. They were using the same
Mm.
guns that they were using for the movie to shoot real bullets like the day prior. So of course, if you don't check all the cylinders, you're going to have potentially a live round in there, and you tried to mix blanks in there, and you're like, oh yeah, it's all good to go.
Dang.
Then it ends up
Yeah.
killing the director or the camera operator or whatever. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's like, obviously you want to train the actors. Like, I get it. Some people were like, well, it's the actor's fault. It kind of is, but
Mm.
at the same time, when you're working on a film set, everything is supposed to be set up for the actor. Like, the armor is not supposed to give the principal a gun without showing him the condition of the gun. And if they are blanks, like, hey, the blanks are loaded in the gun, here are the blanks, blah, 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 and you're good to go.
Mm.
I think they probably just handed him the gun and he like assumed it's like film ready and was not film ready.
Dang.
So like
Yeah.
there's the aspect of like your traditional like any good person's gonna check to see if the gun's clear and whatnot. But obviously like revolvers are slightly different just because the mechanical nature is different. You got the cylinder that comes to the side. He probably thought it was all loaded with blanks. And so like and that's the thing. It's like in the real world, we're like, you're checking to make sure the gun isn't loaded. In the film world, the
Mm.
gun's supposed to be loaded, but it's supposed to be loaded with the right ammo. So when he gets
Right.
handed the gun, he probably didn't know any better and was like, "Oh, the armor handed it to me. The armor is supposed to know the condition of the weapon." They give it and they tell him and show him the condition of the weapon, and like, cool. So that's kind of my thoughts on
Dang.
it. It's partially his fault, but at the same time, knowing how the film industry works and how things work on the film side is ultimately the armor's fault.
Makes
Because
total sense.
the armor set them up for failure. It's like telling someone to drive a stunt car, but you didn't check to see if like I don't know, the brakes worked or something like that. Like,
Absolutely.
of
Absolutely.
course they're gonna
Yeah.
crash.
Or absolutely. And
Yeah,
thank you for weighing in on that.
yeah.
And not that, this will be used in a legal
No, yeah.
proceeding
I
or
mean,
anything.
that's
I'm
that's
just
just
curious.
yeah, that's my personal opinion. Just from being on
Of
set
course.
around weapons
Hmm.
in a film environment versus like just most like I said, most people's experience with weapons is either with airsoft or shooting real guns, but the film industry and being on a film set is its own animal, and so weapons are
Hmm.
treated very differently in that kind of environment. But I mean, that's why
Okay.
people love airsoft guns because you can't really kill anyone with an airsoft gun. It's a lot harder to make that kind of mistake with that, and they're cheap and they're readily available and they're everywhere. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Seriously. Thank you. I know I keep saying that, but so interesting. So kind of going from there, what has been like the biggest challenge for your consulting experience on these sets? I don't know if you have one that just kind of pops up to
I
you.
mean, at the end of the day, your job is to give consulting, but it doesn't mean they're going to take it. Good
Okay.
productions will really listen and stand by their technical advisors. Because like even on Call of Duty, it's like you'll be like, "Hey, here's the kit. This is what the guy's supposed to look like." And of course, the artist wants creative freedom. It's like, "Well, can we put a pouch here?" Well, you really wouldn't have a pouch there, but like, so that's where like you'll see like video games like Call of Duty, like in Cold War. There's some of the skins have like a somewhat realistic foundation, but then a
Mm.
kind of a bunch of unrealistic stuff kind of gets put on top. It's not because
Okay.
anyone's trying to be unrealistic. It's the artists behind the character design and wanting to have a little bit more creative freedom and kind of spice it up a
Mm.
little bit. I think some games or some movies do a better job at taking their creative liberties better than others because some take them too far, some just do a little bit where it's like still realistic. And it really just depends on the relationship between the technical consulting team and the production itself and how much they trust each other and how much, like I said, at the end of the day, the production is like, we just need guys and gear. So like if I have
Yeah.
the opportunity, if I have the opportunity to put the talent in the correct stuff, I will every single time. But of course, depending on what you're doing, they might want to change something or add something or whatever. I mean, it's when you're dealing with military stuff, it could be something. Sometimes it's as anal as a ribbon, or
Hmm.
just as it's like, or it could be like, just make sure they have the right camouflage. You know, it really just depends. But I've been lucky to see a bunch of different perspectives, working on big sets, working on small sets, because you're on a big set too, like if you're in a big production that has a lot of real extras, which in my opinion, you're kind of fortunate to work on a set like that, because that means they have money. And that means you're probably
Awesome.
working, and it's like you're probably working with a director that appreciates practical effects and real background, because they're going through their whole thing about having CGI background doubles. Those have always been around for a while, but like it's been really scaring people, because people literally will lose jobs if you never need background people anymore. But
Of
you know,
course.
for me, like part of the consideration is like, well, how many people do you have to dress up? 5 or 50 or 500? So
Yep. Yeah.
obviously the productions that have the manpower and the ability to properly equip, train, and utilize like hundreds of extras and make them look good, all for that all day. But obviously there's obviously a balance too. Sometimes the balance is cost. Like, what's their budget?
Yeah.
Can their budget afford this much in realistic equipment, or is every guy in the back going to have a rubber gun? You know, depends. Like on Tenet, most of us had metal non-working guns on
Okay.
Tenet, but and then of course the principals had blank firing guns too. So there's
I
a little
see.
bit of everything there, but that kind of gives you an idea of how you layer things. There's a lot of filmmaking and even video game stuff, but especially filmmaking is like cheating and kind of like deceiving the eye, and kind of, you know, you're basically having to fake stuff in the background, whether it's fake buildings or fake people or fake guns or whatever. It's the art of filmmaking, because you know no one really has 100% of everything unless somehow you do.
Right. And oh my gosh, this is so cool. Okay. So I saw on your website that you actually do acting. So are you saying you were in Tenant as an
So
actor?
yeah, so basically that was just like background work. So not like, I wouldn't
Okay.
call that like SAG acting, although I mean I did
Okay.
enough stuff where if I really wanted to apply for SAG, I could. But that
What
was
is SAG for
Screen
those
Actors
of
Guild,
us?
Screen Actors Guild.
Okay.
So that's for
Okay.
like all like the people with speaking lines. They've got like union negotiated rates and everything like that. I just did the background
Oh.
stuff, and I kind of fell into that because there's this thing called special abilities. So if you know how to ride horses, or if you know how to drive cars, or if you know how to use weapons, there are roles in Hollywood that you can do, even if it's just background. We need guys who know how to use guns and stand by this gate or run in a battlefield. That's kind of how I got roped into that. My first one I did was the Netflix film Bright with Will Smith.
Yes.
One of my buddies, Kevin Vance, he worked on so Bright was a David Ayer film, and Kevin is like one of David Ayer's guys. He's worked on Fury, End of Watch,
Mm.
Sabotage. He's done all those movies with them. And he hit me up. He's like, "Hey man, we're looking for some veterans and, you know, special abilities guys to do some background on this movie." And I was like, at the time my job was really flexible, so I was like, "I'll do it."
Okay.
You know, I've always wanted to work on a movie before. So my first movie that I really did that I got to like be in was like $100 million Netflix movie, which was really cool.
That's
And we had,
incredible. Yeah.
oh, it was a lot of fun, because you know it's like, for
Oh my
me,
gosh.
I was just curious about it, because I was like, what, I love filmmaking, so I want to see the behind
Yeah.
the scenes. I want to be there. Like one of the things I always wanted to check out was boxes I wanted to check was be in some kind of war movie or movie with a big battle, which I checked that box with Tenet. But this one
Yeah.
was cool because like we were like there with the principals, like we're like in the middle of the action doing stuff, working with the director, super cool. Um, so not bad for the first movie. And like we had this like
Yeah.
weird mask, and like, man, it's funny because people say you can't see anything out of a stormtrooper helmet. Well, I'm like, there's way worse helmets to wear than that where you can't see anything. Like I had a hole like this big
Oh
in
my
this. It looked
goodness.
really cool. I had like a
In
Splinter
the
Cell
first scene,
goggle.
right?
It's in like in Bright, you'll see a
Oh,
bunch
and
of
Bright.
guys. Yeah, in Bright, you'll see a bunch of guys towards the end running around with these cool uniforms that almost kind of look like bio suits or biochem suits almost, but they have like goggles on and like, you know, Splinter Cell looking
Cool.
goggles. I had that, and I had like, it had this veil on it, and I could only see through like a hole this big. And we had to get out of a car, run up to a building, and like run in to pretend like we were going to clear the building. But it was hard not to even trip on the curb, frankly.
Such a good point.
So
Can't
that was a
imagine.
lot of fun, but a lot of learning at the
Yeah.
same time. That
Sure.
was like couple 3-4 days working in downtown LA, this kind of really rough neighborhood that they paid the whole street off to just get this last shot where it's like toward the end of the movie with Will Smith, and then did that, and then did a bunch of different background gigs on SWAT. I think I was on SWAT 2 or 3 times, like at the headquarters, on Ontario Airport, and then like somewhere by Port of LA. Did that gig at least 3 times, where they just needed background SWAT guys. And then Tenet was cool because I got the call for that. It was like, hey, they need every Joe and Mary in town for this film, and you had to go to Warner Brothers and do this audition where you had to learn how to run backwards, because in the movie the time is moving forward and backwards. So if you ever watch the movie and you see people running forward and backwards, it's because people are actually running forward and backwards. Sometimes,
oh my God, that's not reversed.
Sometimes they do reverse the footage. But the whole point was they needed to train people to do both so they could play it forward or backward. They needed the creative freedom to go, well, we like this clip, we want to play it forward. Or we like this clip, we want to play it backwards.
The heck?
So we had to learn how to run backwards, wasn't very easy. And most of the people from the audition made it because they just needed bodies for that. And then next thing you know, we're at Eagle Mountain, Palm Springs area, kind of by 29 Palms. Just working on that movie. That was easily the coolest set. One, because Christopher Nolan, he does practical, like 90% of stuff is there. It's like real helicopters, real people, real talent. We're working with like real Chinooks and stuff. And then I think I was in John David Washington's chalk. So like John David Washington is like on our helicopter in our group, and he's like the guy at the front. And so like they have the helicopter land, and then we like go on the helicopter, we run off the helicopter, and we're in this big battle scene, and the Russians are all over the place. You're shooting at them and everything, and it's just super cool to see, like, to not just see it, but to like be in this battle. I was like, this is cool. Like, this is gonna be in the movie. It's funny because sometimes people will do a scene and it doesn't make the movie. There's no way that scene wasn't gonna be in the movie, because like every time those 4 helicopters took off and had to reset, it's like $1 million shot. Like
oh my God,
$250,000 to $1 million easily. Like when people say like the $1 million shot, like that's the $1 million shot. You got like 400 or 500 people running at each other, fighting, helicopters landing and stuff, and it's like practicals. There's explosions going off. That was like really cool. So did that for like 3 weeks. Like that 10-15 minute scene takes like 3 weeks to shoot out there. So I got to see the end of the movie out there without even realizing it.
Oh my goodness.
And then like we're trying to think in our mind, like, how is this going to fit in the movie and everything? And and then there was one time we got to go fly around in the helicopter, because we had to go on the helicopter. Then they needed a shot of it taking off and flying around. So we got to fly around in that, which, I mean, flying around helicopters happens a lot in movies and TV shows and stuff, but it was cool because not everyone got to do it on that set. So it was like, that was a lot of fun.
Right.
But yeah, no, that was a cool, really cool project to be a part of. I literally got the call because like one of the guys that I knew was like the key costumer on there. And I actually have one of the screen used costumes from Tenet in my closet back there. You'll probably see it on my Instagram if you see me shooting an AK. It's actually the bad guy uniform, because like they gave me an option. He's like, hey, do you want the uniform you wore? I was like, the uniform we wore kind of sucked. I want the bad guy uniform.
That's so cool. Yeah.
So I got like very few people have that, but it's probably one of like in my collection of stuff. It's probably one of the rare things that I have. I have some stuff from the Hunger Games. I've got a helmet from Suicide Squad, but that one is like, you really could not get that anywhere else because it was custom made for the movie. No, but there's no way you'd get your hands on that. So. Yeah. So I walked away with a great souvenir.
For real. I was about to say, what a souvenir. So Tenet is one of my husband's favorite movies all time.
Oh, yeah.
He left that movie and he was like, this is my favorite movie. And because he loves conceptual movies. He's a avid chess player and just
the whole movie was a temporal pincer. The whole movie was a palindrome or whatever. It's like the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning, and it really it gets to that halfway point and then it like reverses and folds in on itself. It's very, I mean, Interstellar was, I mean, even though Interstellar had some interesting concepts, it was a little bit more straightforward. I think this was definitely one of those more creative projects in terms of he had a really cool concept and he wanted to turn it into reality. Even though Inception was a cool concept, it was kind of still linear. Like it was still a very linear story that had layers. But Tenet was weird because it had layers and then it like folds in on itself. So
Yeah.
like that's
You're
why
making me want to watch it again.
it's hard to follow, but like I mean I think that's one of the reasons why, like, not to say that maybe it didn't do well. It also came out during COVID, but like
Yep.
I'm biased for the movie because I worked on it, but I thought the
Right.
concept was brilliant, and it's,
It
it's
is.
cool to see directors taking a chance or a gamble. So for me, it was cool because it's like I'm working with one of the directors that's like one of my favorite filmmakers ever, and then I also get to be in a big battle. And then it's like, and plus I got the souvenir and everything, and it's just kind of checked all the boxes for me. It's like, all right, worked on a Christopher Nolan movie. And
Right.
it's funny because you see him on set. There's no chairs. He walks out of the SUV and he's got the scarf on and the hat, and he's like pointing and doing the whole director thing. And then they're like 80s, like, all right, everyone get in your places. And then it's like action, and then everything starts blowing up. It's a lot of fun.
That sounds like so much fun. And
Oh
also,
yeah.
can we go back? What did you do with the Hunger Games?
Oh, so I didn't do anything on the Hunger Games, but
Okay.
so like a couple of the other gear souvenirs I've collected over the years. I got the helmet from a buddy that worked on Suicide Squad, and I got the Hunger Games plate carrier. They actually, for some reason, they
Nice.
made enough of those that they found their way on the secondary market. And
Interesting.
there were a bunch
Okay.
of, yeah, but I mean, mine's got like fake blood or something on it still. But
That's so
yeah,
cool.
there was enough of those made. They were all specifically made by S&S Precision for the Hunger Games, and enough of them made
Wow.
its way into the film collector / gear collector marketplace that quite a few people have those now, which I think is kind of cool. They even made enough that
Oh,
they're out there, because a lot of times stuff gets made and you never see it again, or it's in some private collector's collection that's all he does is buy, screen use stuff, which I know a couple of those guys.
okay.
But yeah, so that's how I acquired those pieces. Those are kind of some of the other cooler pieces of gear that have like some kind of cool story with them that I've collected over the years.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That is so cool. And not that I'm like even ready to get off of this topic, but I am very curious on how gaming has kind of manifested in your life. So when did it start, and where are you now with it, and in between?
I mean, like, I've always been into games, whether it was Game Boy or, Super Nintendo and stuff. But like, I think the moment when I really knew I was a gamer was when I played GoldenEye.
Okay.
Man, I mean, that's from my era. I mean, it's GoldenEye. It was just like, that was the game. And then I was like, wow, I'm really good at this. Because
I'm looking it up right now.
I would go to holiday parties. It's the original James Bond N64 game. I would go to holiday parties
Thank
and
you.
I would clean house. And I was like, man, I'm
Really?
actually pretty good at these first-person shooter games. It's like, I should play
That's
more of these.
awesome.
So that's where
Yeah.
like I really started falling in love. I played Mario Party and Smash Bros and stuff before that. I still love those games. I got really good at those games. But GoldenEye was kind of like, yep, that's kind of my thing.
Okay.
And then I got Xbox, and it's funny because I almost didn't get the Xbox. I almost got the GameCube for Christmas. My dad was like, "Oh, you're growing up." It's like, see this Xbox thing here? Yeah, he could recognize the direction technology was going, and he's like, "You're gonna like that better." And it was funny because I was actually kind of almost a little disappointed. I was like, "Oh man, I really wanted the GameCube," but then the Xbox showed up, and then and I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And then it had this Halo. It had Halo. Of course, going from
Yes.
GoldenEye to Halo was like that perfect transition. And I was like,
Okay.
"Oh my god, this game is like the greatest game ever made." It's a beautiful game. I mean, still to this day is like one of the best games. Whether it's the sound, video game design, character design. I mean, everything about the game is memorable. And I was good at that game. And I got really good at that game, and ever since been gaming ever since. Yeah, I did that. Eventually, when Battlefield got a little bit bigger, I started getting more into PC games. I still play console games, but I'm
Okay.
one of those weird people that I can play console or PC. Some people can
That's
only
so
play
cool.
console, and some people can only play PC. But I'm able to do
Right.
both. And sometimes I have games on both systems. I'll play both, depending on how complicated the game is. But the more complicated games are on PC. But I really got into that, and then I started writing for off-duty gamers. Like I forgot how
Okay.
I met them. It was like a blog, basically, like a military veteran gaming blog. So I started writing for them, and then I got to go to my first E3 like in 2012 from this company called Games. They basically, you might have seen it. It's like this suitcase that you could put an Xbox in that has a screen. And it was a military
Yes.
veteran-owned company, yeah. And I was one of the early adopters for that because I was like, "This is
Okay.
genius! You mean I
Right.
can take my Xbox anywhere and play, and I just need to plug it in?"
Yeah.
So, and I still have at least one of those to this day. The company doesn't exist anymore, but probably one of my most favorite innovative companies. But they got me a pass to E3, and so then I went from being just a gamer to like going to like an industry show when it wasn't really open to the public at that time. He's like, you still had to be press, media, industry something to go to E3. And I got to go to that and made a bunch of connections and met a bunch of people. And then I actually met a bunch of people that I would work with later on. So started doing that, started writing for video games. And then through that, going to, maybe it wasn't that E3, it could have been that E3 or one of the following ones, ended up meeting the people from Battlefield. And then just from meeting them, ended up getting on their Game Changers program, which is kind of like their influencer program, if you will. And then started doing stuff with them and got to get early access to like certain games. Like it really went into full swing during Battlefield Hardline, because I was still living in LA at the time, so I could go to Redwood Shores and go play test, Battlefield Hardline super easy. And I'd be like, hey boss, I'm gonna go up there and play for a couple days and just put in some time off and whatnot. So I did that, and then did Battlefield 5, no, Battlefield Hardline, then Battlefield 1. Then it kind of trailed off around Battlefield 5, but and then I totally forgot. I don't know why I missed it. Before Battlefield Hardline, I got to go play Battlefield 4 when it was unveiled on Xbox in Europe for the Battlefield Showdown. So my first game changer thing was they basically built Team USA was a team of all the top or most well-known Battlefield gamers in the United States versus all the people from Europe. So the first thing I got to do was that. And I remember getting to get some time off away from, I think I was stationed at Fort Bragg at the time. Got to go to do that. So it was cool because I got to go to Europe. I got to play on Team USA. I'll send you the video later. It's pretty hilarious.
Please.
And it's being like live streamed by like GameSpot and like, I think it was GameSpot. Yeah, GameSpot, I think, was one of the big sponsors for that. And it's being, hosted by Xbox, because Xbox is the big sponsor, because they're showing the game that everyone's been waiting to play for the first time on Xbox One. So that was cool. And we kicked Europe's ass. We kicked Team Europe's ass so bad. And part of it was just they just didn't get along, or they didn't communicate well. But Team USA was like, you got 32 guys that are all like fighting for the same goals and objectives. Like, oh, of course we're going to win.
Right.
We destroyed them. That was got to be some of the most intense gaming, because it was like, we can't lose. We cannot lose to Team Europe. So did that, and then started doing the game-changing stuff. And the game-changing stuff is wild to put in perspective, because like during E3 for Battlefield 1, when Battlefield 1 was unveiled, I got to be part of the 64-man demo, the live demo that's being live streamed everywhere at E3 of like multiplayer when they're first like showing off the game. And it's like they paid all the game changers that were there. They got paid like $5,000 to literally play this game for 30 minutes. But then they have people like Snoop Dogg and Wiz Khalifa and like all these like real celebrities kind of intermixed with all the other gamers, and they're all playing. I'm like, well, if we're getting paid $5,000, these guys are probably getting paid like $10, $15, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 to play for this thing, because E3 is like that big press event, so they want to generate as much buzz as possible. So got to do that, and then from the game changer side, moving towards less the influencer stuff and more towards the consulting. Like I still did some stuff with Ghost Recon that was a little more influencery, if you will, but I think after that, I started working on film projects and whatnot. And then one of my buddies, who was the kind of like the main authenticity guy over at Red Storm, his name's Travis Gates. He's not there anymore, but he was the guy who managed all the Tom Clancy titles, like Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, Splinter Cell, all those titles, the Division. And they needed someone to do some mocap directing or whatever, if you will, for the Division 2 commercial. So I did that at Digital Domain, which was right down the street from EA in LA. Did that, did the mocap one, and then I did the live action Ghost Recon commercials. Like that went well. And then I got called back. I was like, hey, we're working on a new Ghost Recon game. We need someone to help consult for the live action commercials. So so that's kind of how the gaming side kind of melded with the filmmaking side. Like I was always a big gamer, but I was never like a pro gamer. But then worked on those couple Ghost Recon commercials, and then after that got called by another friend who was working on Call of Duty, because I had one of the kits they needed for the game.
Oh,
So,
nice.
so I got,
Okay.
yeah, it was the Black Hawk Down kit. So they're like,
Okay.
hey, you have that kit, right? I was like, I do.
Yes, I do. That's
So
so
I
cool.
brought it. I
Okay.
got to do some reference photography for that, and then yeah. So my gear is in Call of Duty Cold War, like my actual gear, which is really cool.
That is really
So
cool.
that's kind
Okay.
of how like I got into gaming, and gaming led to doing something else. So like one thing that gaming taught me, one, it was interesting because some people have only worked in one industry. Like some people only worked
Mm,
in the film industry, some people only worked in the firearms industry, some people
yeah.
only worked in the gaming industry. I've had at least a glimpse or look into what it's like working in all three, how they
Yeah.
compare, how they relate. Like I'll tell you right now, video games probably has the most money, probably more money than the movie industry in terms of what they're able to pull off.
Really?
Like they just throw an event together where they can just pay Snoop Dogg $50,000 to stream this game for 30 minutes. Like they've got way more money than the film industry sometimes. Um,
Okay.
Plus they make more money. But it was very interesting to see how all those industries work and how they're kind of interconnected. But I
Yeah.
was trying to think. There was like one other thing I was going to say, but like that's kind of the gist of it. Oh yeah, the one thing I learned from the video game industry is like after being able to see the other side of the fence and really going to like what a real influencer event is like. That's from like a industry that has a lot of money. I was like, okay, there's definitely two types of people. You're either a consumer or you're a creator or you're on the other side of the fence. Like whatever, it doesn't matter what industry it is, whether it's guns or sports or BMX or movies or games or filmmaking or whatever. Like there's definitely people who spend their whole lives just consuming whatever the product is. And then there's people who are on the other side, they're either creating it or they're part of the like the crew promoting it, whether the influencers or whatever and
Mm,
whatnot. So it's very interesting to see both sides. It's like, okay, I
yeah.
was like, I definitely know what side I'd rather be on. Because, like,
Right, right. Yeah.
because when you think about it, some people's only interaction with a product, whether it's like this or whatever it is, right? Or like one of the guns or something, some people's only interaction with that game or that product is playing the game. Then there's
Right.
other people whose interaction is getting to help create it, getting help getting it
Mm-hmm.
made, not just from the dev team, but they're being invited to come out and work on it and actually help shape whatever that is. And I'm
Right.
like, that's pretty cool. That's what I prefer to do. And I've been fortunate to have been part of several things where you get to shape different aspects of whatever it is, whether it's movies or video games or even today working in the defense industry. I'm getting to help shape whatever that thing is.
Right.
Like the Incog X holster from HSP and Safariland. I was like one of the guys who kind of helped build that. I mean, like I actually was the one that like slapped together the logo that's on the holster. So like that's
That
kind of
is
cool.
awesome.
It's like being
Absolutely.
able to contribute to something like that. So I think if people want to, I mean, some people, like I said, they can either be consumers their whole lives, but there's so many opportunities to contribute, to be part of something, or to be on that side of the fence where you don't always have to just play the game. You could work on the game, or you can like find a way of being a creator that works with that company on the game. You don't always have to be just playing it all the time or just using it. There's a lot more that can be done. Like I said, whether you watch a movie or a show, or you get to work on the movie or the show, and you know the people who work on the movie or the show, which is really cool. So that's kind of how I view things, no matter what industry it is. And that's kind of how I got into. Long story short, that's kind of how I got into gaming and how gaming led to film and all that other stuff.
That is, I wish I had a better word, but it's just so cool, seriously. And it's so cool to see you light up and get so excited to talk about it. I can tell you really love all of it.
It's
And
fun. I
yeah,
had a good time doing
sounds
all
like it.
those. I don't regret any of those. Like even amongst my peers, whether they came from the airsoft side or the gun industry side, like I said, a lot of them have only done stuff in that one industry. They've never been able to
Yes.
cross the chasm and do stuff in other areas and not
Mm-hmm.
just be there, but be like a contributing factor. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
what I think is kind of cool. It's like, man, like, like looking back, like sometimes I'm like, man, I wish I was like more successful. But then I look at the things that I've done and I'm like, well, that was actually pretty cool. Like I'd been very fortunate to
100%.
do those things. And all,
Yeah.
all that was just opportunities would come up and I'd just take them. I'd be like, well, that's a cool opportunity. I'll try it out. And lo and behold, it kind of like the dots and the spider webs, things just connected and just became very synergetic. There was a lot of synergy, if you will. There's things just cross pollinated really well. And something I do in airsoft would be very advantageous for something I do in the film industry or the gun industry or vice versa. So, and to this day, I still kind of like do some like background light consulting slash, I still talk to a bunch of guys in the gun industry and the game industry and whatnot. We got a bunch of Haley strategic gear into Call of Duty recently. I knew the art director for Modern Warfare 2. I think he got brought in right during that transition to Modern Warfare 2, but he hit me up and he's like, hey, we want to put your stuff in the game. I was like, cool, so we'll do it.
Oh
so
my goodness.
we sent a bunch of stuff over to get scanned, so you'll see Halo strategic gear in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and 3 because they got the rights to use it and those follow-on titles as well. So yeah, that was cool. It's just like another, even though I'm not working directly on the game as much, it's like, I'm still looking at like approving stuff and giving him feedback like, hey, the scale of the gear is wrong, you scanned it, and you just like adjust it or give him feedback on how something should look. And so I've at least been able to give feedback on a couple of the skins, even though I didn't directly work on those skins. So like I still tied to the gun and to the game industry still.
Yeah. I was about to ask what a typical consulting session would look like for gaming specifically.
I mean, it could be something as simple as putting together a list of reference material to being on set working with the talent. And like, I mean, everyone's rate's a little bit different, but like sometimes it's just been, hey, we need you to put a list of references for this. Like, here's the artwork, source all the stuff to make that artwork real. Something like that. Or like something as part of that. And then sometimes it's like, hey, we need you on set. Here's our shooting days. Help get the principals or the backgrounds or whatever dressed up and get them all looking good, and then send them off to set to do their thing. And then sometimes on set it'll be like, hey, are we holding the guns right, or are we doing this right? And like, do it like this or hold it like that. Or, a lot of that is like on the fly, but yeah, some of it's like behind the scenes or ahead or during pre-production or pre-pro, and some of the consulting is during production. And then occasionally you'll get some notes from like post-production, like, hey, you've done the pre-pro, you gave them the reference material, they bought the stuff, now you're putting it on the actor, and then you filmed it, and then in post-production they're like, oh, we need to do this pickup shot, or here's this like footage that we want to insert, does this look right? Or they need to CGI something on a guy and they want to make sure they CGI the right thing on the guy or something like that.
Right.
All kinds of stuff like that. So I've seen the whole gambit. So like the consulting could be a little bit of anything. It could be anything from doing a video call and just giving them information, or towards literally putting the gear on the principal actor, which I've done that before. Right. Like I got to work with John Bernthal, and I'm like putting my plate carrier on, putting my gear on him and my helmet on him and making him look cool. I'm like, that's
my
cool.
God, how freaking cool. Yeah, I'm a fan of him 100%. Sorry, I know my
really
husband's
cool.
listening because he's the She Shield editor, but...
Oh, really? He's really
yes,
cool. There are definitely some people in the film industry that I think are really down to earth, very honest. John Bernthal is one of them for sure. Yeah, like there's a lot of cool guys out there. Obviously there's a lot of not cool guys out there too, but there's still people out there that are very humble about their craft, their work, and they respect what we do enough to like work with us and do stuff like that. So yeah.
That's incredible. I can kind of see from his social media, he seems very authentic, but you never know what they're doing. So
yeah, I mean, his show is called The Real One, so he's all about authenticity, which I think is really cool. A bunch of my friends who he's worked with in the past have been on that show, like Tyler Gray, Kevin Vance, dudes who've done way more on the military side than I've ever done, but who've been people that I've been following in the film industry, and like I kind of tried to follow in their footsteps a little bit. Yeah, those guys are cool. Like if you ever get a chance to talk to those guys are amazing. They worked on some of the games that I grew up playing and was like, oh man, I want to work on video games too. So it's like kind of, and like those guys helped me get into that world a little bit as well.
That is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, and
it's incredible.
Just kind of knew the right people, right time, and do the right stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. And does being in Arizona, like, do you get less opportunities now, or you mentioned virtual consultations? I mean, like, are you able to do that?
My focus is a little bit different now because I'm a little bit more focused on, like, obviously what I'm doing at work, what I'm doing with my own stuff. Obviously, I'm not in LA anymore, but I still get hit up for like consulting gigs or just information and whatnot. But it hasn't been as much directly on set because it just hasn't been a priority because of what I'm doing right now. But if I was living in LA, then I'd be like probably on set, like working on a show like SEAL Team or something like that. So it really just
Interesting.
depends. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very interesting. Okay, so this question, I can't, I've been having trouble deciding if I want to actually ask you this because it may sound silly, but I'm curious. Is there any actual tactical advantage to playing video games and how that transfers to like military or law enforcement
So
or even civilian self defense?
there's a little bit of crossover, but
Okay.
I don't think there's too much. There's a thing called visual representation.
Okay.
I'd say it applies a little bit more to VR because
Of
you're
course.
like in the space. But
Mhm.
I mean, even when you play video games, like you can apply certain things from the real world that transfer over, and some things from the video game world can kind of transfer over. It's a little
Sure.
harder because obviously, like
Right.
in the real world, you're wearing the stuff, you're holding the thing, you're getting tired, you know, you're physically exhausting yourself. Versus the video game, that doesn't happen. So there's more, I guess there's more variables in the real world that kind of throws off how good you are versus the video game. It's like everyone can be good because you're just clicking and pointing the mouse. But from a visual representation thing, like, I mean, kind of how I learned how to reload an M4 was kind of from Call of Duty, if I remember. Like I
Okay.
because
Okay.
the animations were really good and they were actually
Accurate. Yeah.
pretty accurate. So like when I got to basic
Okay.
training, I'm like doing this reload. They're like, dude, you've only been in basic training for like a few weeks. How do you know how to load it this way? I mean, that's where I learned it from. So, I mean,
Mhm.
there are some things you can learn if from a tactics perspective, maybe because like I mean,
Yeah.
it depends how realistic you take it too. Like I know a couple guys that
Okay.
have realistic servers where they do like all day missions on that, and so like the communications could be kind of realistic, the positioning could be
Okay.
realistic. They're shooting, but they're not really doing the shooting, they're just clicking the mouse, so the shooting might not be
Right.
realistic, but there's aspects of that like the coordination and the teamwork that's realistic. So like it just depends. Like there's some things that translate, some things that don't, but it is a lot of fun to take a concept or an idea that you have in the real world, apply it in a scenario in a video game and see if it kind of works. But of course, it's like it's still kind of a rough simulation of the real world. Nothing's ever one to one, so it's hard to kind of
Right.
it's kind of hard to balance that out. But so
Yeah.
are there things that cross over? Sure, but it's like it's not everything. Some things for sure. Yeah,
Right. Absolutely. I remember I
yeah.
was
Oh,
at
uh,
this USP. Oh, go
I was
ahead. No, no,
sorry.
no.
I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna say one thing. The
Yeah, yeah.
one thing that
Please.
does work is memorizing what the space looks like and the layout.
Okay.
That can
Okay.
transfer over very well, or the map, if you will. If it's no different than looking at a map
Interesting.
on Google Earth and then going there, or flying around
Okay.
in Microsoft Aviator or whatever it is, and flying from point to point and memorizing the city layout. Like that's visual representation of where you are and what the place looks like, and navigating can
Hmm.
translate over if it's done properly. Or like
Interesting.
like a stage, if you will. If you shoot a certain stage in VR and then you shoot that stage for real, that can kind of help translate a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's very interesting. I learned a little bit about the crossover and the similarities more so between auditory and visual simulation for shooting and how that applies to law enforcement military training. I can't say who this person worked with because I don't know if this equipment is like even available right now, but I was lucky enough to have him in a class with me at this USPSA training event. And he showed us the equipment and how like one little laser beam that was green represented an assailant, without a weapon, whereas like two beams represented one with a pistol pointed at
Hmm.
us. One was, if it was three, he was out low ready. It was like all these different things.
Hmm.
It was so interesting. So that was the first time I was ever introduced to that. That kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what work do you do with Haley Strategic currently? And do you have any, as far as your specialties? Is it in any of that? Like, so prep with visual or auditory
I mean,
stimulation?
it's funny because most of the stuff that I do with HSP is all media based. Like I do like the
Okay.
marketing and social media and whatnot. So it's not even like I'm not really on the training side of the house to do like any of the shooting or anything
Okay.
like that. I do a lot of training on my own time and a lot of like research on my own time as well. And I'll still bring that back to the company. Um, But yeah, it's funny because like I'm not like at the company,
Yeah.
I'm not in the training department at all. So there's like a whole team of guys that literally do that all the time. So most of the training for me is just kind of me just exploring what's out there. Like the thermal thing with the airsoft stuff is like I just want to learn more about thermal, so I'm going to go out and do it, and then
Right.
will bring what I learned back to the team and whatnot. So I'm not a trainer by any means in terms of like instructing people. Like I've helped teach my friends and stuff like that, but
Right.
and I still think regardless of whether you're in the marketing department or you're on the training team, shooting is a good skill for anyone to have. So if you're still
Sure.
training on your own, whether it's using VR or doing visual representation or using airsoft or whatnot, they're all valuable tools. And like doesn't I mean at the end of the day, it's like doesn't matter what your job is. If you want to, master whatever this thing is, like whether it's shooting or whatnot, then just go master it. You don't necessarily have to have that title to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and speaking of thermals, I'd love to hear about your time in Hawaii,
Oh yeah,
and how you feel about thermals compared to, did you say, what was
night
it?
vision. Yeah,
Night vision and that
yeah.
comparison.
So there's been a big trend in the defense industry based off conflicts in Ukraine and
Mm,
Israel overseas, and just what we've seen here. Night vision technology is advancing at a pretty good pace. Thermal technology is advancing like leaps and bounds, like way
interesting.
ahead. Before, when thermal was kind of like super low res, it's like, okay, you can see something's there, but now you have to identify it with night vision. But even with night vision, it's like you can't see that far. I mean, sometimes you can, but depends how much light there is. So if there's not that much light, you're not going to see very far, even with really good tubes. Because night
Right.
vision basically operates on just basically amplifying whatever available light you have. If you're in a jungle with tree canopy and the moonlight's not penetrating, you're still not going to see a whole lot. You'll have better clarity with higher end tubes, but at the end of the day, it's like your field of view or the distance you can observe or positively identify something is not that great, to where you'll have to use artificial means to illuminate whatever it is you're looking at. The downside
Mm,
is now everyone has night vision, so the means of artificially using your illuminator or your pointer or whatever, which I've used in the past, can give you away, especially in a force on
okay.
force situation, like an old force on force situation I was doing. I ambushed a bunch of guys in the street, ran up into this building, shot a bunch of guys from the second story window at below and across the street. And what's interesting with IR lasers is you can point it into a room across the street, and it's almost like someone took a flashlight and threw it across the street, landed in that room. It's like lighting that whole room up, and you can see people's shadows and stuff in there. It's very interesting how infrared
Yeah.
technology works. Downside is now is everyone has night vision, so you can't do that because it's like having a lightsaber coming out of your gun. It just gives your position away. So
Interesting.
passive aiming got very popular, but like everything has its advantages and disadvantages. Like even with passive aiming, you're not giving yourself away, but if there's a guy in a dark area, you're still not really going to be able to see him. Like it just,
Mm,
shadows still work at night and you'll see shadows. So it's like, you'll be much more concealed if you use the terrain and light to your advantage. What you can't hide from without special equipment is thermal. So now I don't need an active laser to illuminate you. Now I don't need to use that in conjunction with basically just passive aiming, which is literally just putting your red dot in front of your night vision. I can just
right.
look at you with thermal and your heat signature gives you away. And the thing is, most people have not developed the technology or have access to the equipment to properly defeat it yet. So if you have thermal right now, you're kind of like a god on the battlefield. You have like superpowers. Like
Okay.
people think night vision's a superpower, and it already kind of is. Like you could
Right.
see in the dark, but
Right.
seeing in the dark has its limitations. You add
Hmm.
thermal on top of that, and it's like having a superpower. Like that's why they call it multispectral like warfare now, where it's like, we have our normal eyesight, then you have like infrared eyesight, and now you have like, heat, thermal heat vision.
Right.
Which is the reason why like it kind of makes sense why the Predator worked so well, because it is really
Yeah.
really
That's what I was
hard.
thinking of.
It is like damn near impossible without any kind of special equipment to hide from thermal. Like to mask your body temperature and make it match the environment around you, especially if the environment's cold. So
Right.
so when I went to Hawaii, I brought both one of the newest thermal optics that came out, the AMG Rattler V2, which is great for hog hunting or whatever. It's a rifle mounted thermal, but it's great for force on force. And then I also brought a couple, it looks like a net, but it's called a Relv Eclipse panel. And it's specially treated. So it's like mesh. You put this mesh up in front of you and you vanish behind it. And so it has cool camouflage. So in our normal visual spectrum, it has camouflage on it, so you'll still blend in. But then it'll also hide or minimize your heat signature like 80% or more, depending on how you use it. And if you stand off away from it, it'll really hide you. Because if you're right on it, your heat will start transferring to the material, and then it'll dissipate some of the heat, but not as much. And eventually it'll start warming up as well. So that technology, even though it's kind of rudimentary, is still kind of in its infancy, but hasn't made its way toward everyone has it. So like I could literally observe a guy from 400 feet, and 300-400 feet, I can see who he is. I can see what weapon he's carrying. So like when I saw people, I was like, that is definitely a bad guy. And then it'd be funny because I'd put that down and look through my tubes. It's like, I know they're there. I cannot see them.
Right.
They're just in this big blob of a shadow, but I can't see them. But with thermal, it's like clear, crystal clear as day, and multiple spectrums in thermal: white hot, black hot, fusion, red hot, whatever. I was like, man, this is like really intense. Like you can, like, there's no way people can hide. You can detect, and when you can detect people sooner, you can make a decision sooner about what you want to do, or how you want to engage them, or how you want to move. One of the best ways to describe how thermals change the battlefield, normally, an infantry unit, you can set up an L-shaped ambush, which is basically a line of guys here and a line of guys here, and these guys are facing this way and these guys are facing this way, right? They're facing in, so that if you walk into that, you're getting blasted from two different directions. Before, you could do that at night and people wouldn't be able to see you. But now, someone could be coming down the road, do a quick scan with thermal, and if you guys aren't hidden well enough, they'll see you. So your ambush turns into react to contact, because now they're like, oh, there's dudes there, and then they start moving in on you on your flank side or whatever. They're basically maneuvering around your ambush to where your ambush isn't good anymore. So that's kind of how it's changing infantry fighting along with drones. Like drones have thermal. It's like, that's, talk about cheating. That's like extra cheating.
Right.
So that's kind of how it's shaping the battlefield from an on the ground perspective. I mean, the thermal optics that vehicles have are like huge. Like the thermal optic I had is like a 50 mil, which is like this, but like you look at a thermal optic on a tank or like on an infantry fighting vehicle, it's like the size of a squid's eye. It's huge, like or a dinner plate. So it has really good detection, but even that can be defeated with some good implementation of like the Relv Eclipse panel. So it just depends how you use it, just like anything else. But that technology's there, and like it's battling, and night vision's kind of, you know, it's being used in conjunction with thermal more and more, to the point where eventually those two will be completely fused together for like the best of both worlds, if you will.
Absolutely. And is our military, I don't know if you're,
So
I don't know if you know this,
our
but
military is experimenting with the enhanced night vision goggle Bravo or Alpha or whatever, which is basically night vision, but it has a thermal overlay. It has like an extra piece or built-in or fusion, like a third eye or whatever you want to call it. That basically creates a thermal outline. So like there's different kinds of thermal. Like some thermal will create like a outline around you and almost makes it look like a video game kind of, which was funny. And then there's like your traditional like predator thermal, which is like white hot, black hot, fusion, you know, all the crazy colors and stuff like that. That's like more like what people think thermal. They think that. But then like the E-Codes and the other different new goggles that come out, and like another little eyepieces that attach to it or whatever, they basically create like a literal outline of the individual. So if I saw a person at night, I would see night vision, and then I would see like a glowing outline of their body. So there's just two different types that are currently available. They have their uses, but like the weapon mounted one was pretty wild. There's just a lot of detail because the sensor was so much bigger on that. This would be way too big to put that on top of a goggle currently. But yeah, that's kind of just some of the technology out there. It's just a huge advantage.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. This is so cool. I'm gonna listen back to this and be like, you couldn't have said any better words for this. No, but for real, this is so incredibly interesting. I'm very much on the concealment side of the
Yeah.
world right now, or the industry. And of course, I'm dabbling in USPSA, but this stuff is beyond me. So it's so cool to get a piece of it from you and from someone that has the perspective that you have. I mean, you kind of have like the perspectacles from National Treasure, when like the little glasses
Yeah,
he finds
yeah,
with all those overlapping lenses.
yeah.
You really have those on right now.
That's
So
cool.
yeah, for real. No, that's so cool. Yeah, when I was in high school and my friends were like sad about a guy, I'd be like, put your perspectacles
Put your
on. Like,
spectacles on.
exactly. Here's your opinion of him, and then here's who he actually is, and then yeah,
That's
yeah.
actually a really
So
kind of funny way of looking at it. I didn't even know that's what those
yeah.
were called. I just remember it's like those are
Oh,
cool.
no. I don't think they're called that.
Okay.
I just call them perspectacles
No,
because that's what they look
I've
like
never
to
heard them
me.
called that before, but it's a
Yeah.
very entertaining way of referring
Right?
to
It
those.
helps. It helps. It helps. Oh, that's so interesting. So I want to make sure I ask you this, because I was, maybe I've just missed it, but what are you doing right now to train? Or you mentioned competition a little bit with
So
airsoft, but
I need to do well. I did do a couple rifle matches last year.
oh,
I
nice.
want to do some more live fire competitions more than I have. It's just
Okay.
busy with work and stuff, but I just need to make
Yeah.
time for that. I did
For,
do the IDARM in Arizona. It's probably my favorite match because
okay.
it's still a competition shooting thing, but it's a little
Hmm.
bit more physical and it's a little bit more in line with how it seems like a more holistic competition in my opinion because
Okay.
I know they've got tactical games, which is more fitness and competition. Then you got your more traditional
Yes.
USPSA competition. Then they kind of had the IDARM, and the IDARM was like, okay, you're shooting a whole competition, but you're wearing like all the gear. I mean, you can either wear no gear or
Okay.
all the gear, and it's like some of those stages are kind of like more traditional competition stages, and some of them are like you're shooting at a target at like 200 yards away on this hill, and you're on a swinging platform, or you're shooting at it and you got to shoot it from here, then you got to run up and shoot it from a different position, then shoot that from a different position. But every time you move up, you also have to shoot this moving target that's going back and forth. Like there's a lot of interesting challenges with that you don't
Yeah.
find at your typical Tuesday night steel, Wednesday night steel match. But
Right.
I like doing those. I still like doing airsoft because the force on force aspect is valuable because it reminds me like you can still be killed. You can still learn all that stuff and still die because it's not so much the shooting that matters in those situations as your decision making. Like the decision making is almost more important than the shooting and a lot of that. I mean it is more important than the shooting in that because the shooting skills are much easier to attain. But when
Hmm.
you're going head to head with people, and it's not just head to head on a clock, but like actually like making decisions on the terrain that you're on in a constantly moving 40 chess kind of battlefield about whether they're going to kill you or you're going to kill them, your shooting doesn't even have to be that good to beat somebody. You just have to have better strategy and better technique. So it's like
Right.
it is kind of humbling to do that stuff, but still take things and like I said, cross pollinate and learn from that. So I do dry fire, I do my own training on the range, I do force on force stuff, and I do competition, and then every now and then I'll kind of mix it in with some kind of simulator training or something. And like I said, trying to keep that holistic view, so I'm not married to one thing. I'm trying to get the best out of everything and understanding what each thing is good for. And obviously for me, like I don't train full time, so it's kind of hard to do all of them. I'll do like
Right.
one for a while, then I'll do another one, then I'll do this one, then I'll kind of rotate through them all. But if I was a full time trainer, it's like every day, if you're not teaching someone, you should probably be using one of those like every single day. Um, and if you had a chance to, I mean, everyone can dry fire, but some of the other things are a little bit more restrictive because you need to go somewhere or buy a certain thing or do something. So that's
Right.
kind of how I'm approaching it right now. You know, competition shooters are really big on their target transitions and like red dots on handguns have become a big thing. So I'm really trying to get better with red dots on handguns.
Hmm.
Um, Obviously with rifles, it's like trying for me, it's about pushing distance and speed. I'm working on that.
Okay.
And then force on force, like I said, force on force is always going to be a mix of learning about new technology, but then also learning about how to implement it and use it in the proper way to where you don't get destroyed on the battlefield. Because you
Right.
could, like I said, you could still learn all that stuff. You could still have a great reload and great transition speeds and everything. But ultimately, when you go into that side, the battlefield is more of a thinking man's game than a shooting man's game, per se. You still need to be good
Right.
at shooting, but the thinking is what's going to get you killed or make the difference
Mhm.
between you getting killed or not killed. so,
Right.
so
Yeah, that
it's
makes a lot of
it's kind of
sense. Yeah.
interesting that, and plus, like I said, you can only shoot one guy at a time. You can only
Right.
watch one avenue of approach at a time. You can,
Right.
at some point you have to sleep. So when you sleep, who's watching your back? Or you can only look one way, so who's looking the other way?
Right.
There's been times where like we're in a perfectly advantageous position, but because our team is not making a push on that side, we're not taking advantage of the situation, they don't send enough guys for this attack, and the enemy force is able to completely repel their attack because they only sent 10 guys at a time instead of 50 or 60 in
Right.
overwhelming force. So it's like, it just depends on stuff like that. So there's definitely things that translate, but that's kind of how I'm approaching training right now. It's a little all over the
Yeah.
place, but it's only because like there's just so many different things you can do. There's not one thing, but like I still will practice like my firearms training. It's kind of like my core right now, but I still venture out
Hmm.
and try those things. And I think everyone should do that. Don't just get married to the same exact training routine because
Right.
there's just so much out there that you can do to add to your regiment or your pie of training, if you will, to just be a
Yes.
more well-rounded person when it comes to training. And I'm pretty sure every type of skill or discipline, whether it's combatives, whether it's race car driving or jumping out of planes, or there's always a whole range of skills that you can do to become more well-rounded, whatever it is. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I completely agree. It's one of the reasons I transitioned out of medical school into this industry because I saw this huge gap in the industry with especially women's concealment. There's a lot of representation for cute outfits, concealment
Yeah.
techniques, but not a lot for like weapons based entanglement and real life contextual training. So I'm happy to hear that you are also sharing that perspective. You're bringing a representation to it, and just by being here on this podcast. So yeah, I'm thankful for your perspective, and it's nice to know other people believe in that. So yeah,
Well, I
absolutely.
think it's cool how you've kind of like found a gap of what's not being talked about or not being done, and then like approaching that as well. Because like you're right, there
Thank you.
really is not as much female driven training or like knowledge transfer
Yeah.
out there, just because when you look at the marketplace of like who's teaching and who's consuming and who's creating, it's majority men. So it's
Right.
definitely we need more of that. Not just for the sake of representation, but just because there's a whole section of people that are hungry for information and knowledge,
Yes.
but the information they need isn't quite making it out there because the information isn't catered to them or to their needs or better to say requirements, because like whenever we develop something
Yes.
for the military or whatever, it's based off their requirements. And like so right now a
Hmm.
requirement isn't being met, so you've identified that gap is there and you're tackling it. So I think that's cool. And I think like one of your
Absolutely.
previous guests, Brittany, does a really great job of that as well.
Hmm.
With like, hey, let's show off like actual way women would carry guns in a competition setting, which is really cool.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Her IDPA shooting from a dress is just iconic. So it actually led me to think about my USPSA setup, and they recently started allowing things like the Filster Enigma from inside the waistband to be worn. So I've actually gone completely inside the waistband, and now I'm kind of like, shit, like my outside the waistband tools or skills are dwindling a bit. And by the way, you mentioned the tactical games. One of my good friends and I are preparing to do the September games as like a partner
Oh,
group
cool.
in intermediate women. So that's another thing I'm trying to branch out into, just be more functionally fit. Uh, because I was really heavy into bodybuilding before this, like just hypertrophy based lifting and stuff. And then I started thinking, like, when's the last time I had to run like
Yeah.
800 meters? Like, I don't know how I would do.
I
So,
think they do a good job of combining functional fitness with the shooting aspect.
yes,
And
yes.
I mean, there's a lot
Yeah,
of high profile people that have been getting into that. Tulsi Gabbard's probably
absolutely.
one of the biggest proponents for that kind of bringing people from the gun side into the tactical
Who is
games. I mean,
it?
she's Tulsi Gabbard. She's a former
Huh.
congresswoman from Hawaii,
Oh, wow.
and former presidential candidate. She ran against Kamala Harris in 2016 at the
Ah,
Democratic
okay.
debates. Yeah, but yeah, she shoots staccato. She's awesome. but she's
That's
really,
awesome.
really into tactical games. And because she's all
Wonderful.
about that kind of meeting of fitness and firearms, which is really great.
Yeah,
I think
that
if you do
life.
that, and then like honestly, like I said, they're all different pieces of the pie.
Yeah,
If you do that stuff, but then also include force on force, like you get, I'd say force on force is honestly the piece of the pie that most people are missing, because it's a
yeah,
little easier to get all the other ones. But and then of course on the airsoft side, there's people who only do force on force, but they're missing everything else. So
right.
they've got a good chunk of the pie, but they're missing everything else. Where most people have like a pretty decent amount of the pie, but they're probably missing the most important part, which is two human minds on the battlefield sparring against each other. Like, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts on it, but I mean, would you say that the sparring and training against another person is probably some of the most valuable um, combative training you can? I mean, that's kind of the root of combative training, honestly. But without the
Yes,
sparring part, that's kind of where you learn and make a lot of the mistakes, where you learn the most, and then you take what you learn, refine it, and then you go again. But I feel like a
absolutely.
lot of people aren't getting that sparring, if you will. They're doing all the
Yes,
processes, they're doing all the techniques, they're getting the conditioning,
right.
but they're not getting that last piece where it's like, all right,
Hmm.
you need to take all that stuff and then put it into the situation where now you are pitted up against another human being and see how that goes. Some people, so obviously for
Absolutely.
some people, it's just like more smaller force on force training or
Hmm.
grappling. For some people, it's like 500 people on a battlefield all fighting each other, 500 or 1,000 people maneuvering on a battlefield. You're not just fighting one person, you're fighting like an army. So it's like a
Absolutely.
wider range, obviously, that could be. But I think that's the case where it's like, that's why I've been trying to get people to cross over. Because, like I said, I have a lot of friends that just do airsoft. They got that pie, but they need to get the rest. But then you got people on the gun
Right.
side who is like, they've got a pretty good amount of the pie, but they still need this one important piece. And I think they just haven't done it because they're either intimidated or they just don't know about it. They just don't know they can do that thing. Um,
Absolutely.
so yeah, that's kind of just my thoughts on that. Yeah.
Oh, I love that you're sharing that. When I was at ECQC, I mentioned earlier I rolled up and I was really concerned about my shooting skills, and then I realized the marksmanship went out the window when I was grappling in a motorcycle helmet with a sim gun, and someone was trying to take my gun from me.
Mhm.
I didn't need to aim in and hit him from 20 yards. He was grabbing my gun, and it became a fight over the gun and things
Yeah.
like that that I'd never considered.
And at that distance too, so like one of my buddies, Tyler Gray, has a really good theory. Like sights on a gun are kind of like training wheels. You don't
Hmm.
really like. It'll sound weird, but you don't, especially on a handgun, because a handgun is a close range
Right.
weapon. You
Right.
almost don't need them, because at the distances you'll typically use a handgun, you're probably not even looking at the sights. You're looking at the person you're shooting at.
Right.
Which was like, I mean, that's why like everyone's doing the occluded red dot thing on. It's like, it's funny because we'll take a handgun, then we'll put a precision optic on it, a red dot, and then people will start taping it over. The reason they're taping it over is because they
Yeah.
want to be able to see through the red dot and see the thing they're shooting at, to see the
Right.
target. Because the problem right now is, I guess, kind of a problem, but not really a problem. There's still a lot of theories about it, but with a red dot, what people are noticing is you'll end up looking at the dot, not the thing you're shooting at. And the way
Right.
your eyes work by looking at the thing that whatever is has your attention. Because if you ever get into an actual fight, you're probably looking at the other person. You're not looking at your gun. You're just like
Right.
your gun's
Absolutely.
coming up into your peripheral, but by having a natural alignment on them, you know you're going to hit them, and you're looking at what
Hmm.
they're doing because that's the thing that's trying to kill you. Um,
Absolutely.
it's like just fight or flight. Like if anything ever happens, like just look at what your eye does. It looks at whatever is the issue or the problem or the thing drawing your attention or yelling or making noise. Um,
Yes.
and especially at
Yeah.
close ranges, you're not going to have time to really see your sights. You might see through them, but you're probably not looking at them. You're looking at the
Right.
whatever the person has.
Right.
So that's why at that close ranges, I'm not to say that sights don't matter, but they kind of don't. Like
Makes
yeah, if
sense.
your
Yeah.
foundation and fundamentals are good enough, you should be able to naturally align on them and shoot them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you're listening and you're like, that's bullshit, I love the way that Craig Douglas explains it. And this is not verbatim, so do not
Sure.
quote me.
Yeah.
Sorry, Craig, if I have this wrong. But he talks about proprioceptive indices, which is like the way he describes it is like pick somewhere in your room right now to point at. So like my, I don't know, my bob mannequin punching bag
Yeah.
is right there. So when I point at him, I do this, and my finger is actually at eye level. I wouldn't point from down here or
Yeah.
here. So when you were talking about bringing it up naturally, that's so true. We have those proprioceptive indices, and I love that you brought that up today. That's not
Yeah.
very much talked about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like we talk a lot about that stuff at work, just because like there's a lot of
Nice.
science-based training at work where there's like
Right.
kinesiology,
Completely.
kinesthetic alignment. Also, I'm not a
Hmm.
kinesiologist. We had a guy that was on staff that was a kinesiologist for a while, but like obviously
Nice.
the CEO studied on like knows about kinesiology and whatnot, and so like
Yeah,
whenever
that's
we
what I studied.
yeah, so like then you'd
Yeah.
love our training programs because
Oh yeah, for sure.
it's literally all about that proprioception, kinesiology, body mechanics. Like that's where it all came from. So
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
I know I would. That's so cool.
Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, that I mean,
Well,
so
yeah.
yeah, that's where like you were saying is like your ability to
Yeah.
naturally point at something. It's like you have the ability to do that. You just could
Mhm.
do it with a gun. And so like
Yes.
that's how people get hit at close range. I mean, there's just some people that you can point at something, but if the recoil management's poor, then all the follow-on shots are going to miss. But yeah,
Absolutely.
so that's where that
Yeah.
natural ability to aim comes from.
Absolutely. Yeah. Very interesting. So, I want to make sure I ask you this before you go. Are there any like shotgun training things you've done in the past, or is that kind
Yeah,
of
I haven't
out of
done
your?
too much shotgun stuff. That's kind of like one of the weapons that I really don't have that much time on. But there's some
Okay.
people who are really impressive with loading the rounds into the tube and how their shotgun's set up and how they set up all the caddies on their gear. That is like a
Right.
whole nother level of expertise that I haven't touched yet. I
Okay.
think the next foray that I'm looking into is probably getting into bolt guns a little bit or gas,
Nice.
precision rifle stuff.
Mhm.
But shotguns, I mean, you can never have too much shotgun stuff.
Absolutely. I was just curious. That's something that is kind of down the road for me right now. I'm starting with rifle training, and then hopefully we'll get into
Yeah,
that a little
pistol
bit. So,
rifle is going to be your bread and butter. Then once you learn those, you can
yeah.
kind of start venturing out into all the other different subgenres, if you will, of training and
Yes.
shooting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, was there anything we missed today that you were kind of
Oh
excited to
man.
talk about?
Um,
I I don't have any more questions. I mean, I want to listen back to
I
this
mean,
episode just
I
to
think the
catch what
only
I
thing I forgot
missed.
to mention was I did World War II reenacting, but that was part of like the historical stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it on your website, I read a little bit about that. So I would love to hear like how you got into that and also what you enjoy most about it. I feel like not a lot of people know about that
Well,
culture.
it's funny you mention that because it's very similar to my other hobbies. It's just kind of in a
Okay.
slightly different setting. It's like adjacent, right? You got guns,
Right.
airsoft, then military reenacting. They're all similar. Like the type of people that you find in those three are all basically the same people. They're just in a
Nice.
different hobby. Like, and that's the
Okay.
same with any hobby per se, but those three hobbies just happen to be like right next to each other, you know. But so it's like, there's guys who like cloning guns and the real steel sides. There's guys who like cloning kits and reenacting, and both of those kind of bled over into airsoft, where people like cloning guns and kit. And it's the same in reenacting, but in reenacting, you're taking it a step further, where you're like, no, you got like the tent and the boots and the authentic like socks and shirts and everything.
Yeah.
Like you're literally like legit head to toe. Um, where like on the milsim side, it's like you're still legit, but like it's like I mean it's a little different. Like the reenacting is more about like the lifestyle and the events and the people versus like milsim and airsoft's more about still winning the game or about the battles and stuff like that. There's a lot of crossover, but they're still a little different. Obviously, like we call them stitch Nazis, but like um
Okay.
been reenacting, it's like you still have people that are like, oh, it would be sewn that way, or like the stitching's wrong or
Mm.
something like that. Like there's a lot of
Interesting.
very attentive
Nuances?
attention to detail. Yeah, like there's
Yeah.
that level of detail in all three, but you find it even more so in reenacting because people like literally dedicate their whole lives and hobbies into that one genre of reenacting, whatever that is. Like some guys, like, all they do is World War II reenacting. Like the one thing I did, which is smart, is like, for example, like some people's skills or interests are narrow and deep. technically I'm kind of like that in terms of firearms, but within firearms I have a wide variety. Like some people
Hmm.
are wide and shallow, so I kind of like, maybe it wasn't so much wide and shallow, but it was pretty well rounded, whereas like I had a wide breadth of hobbies and I was fairly deep in all of them. Some guys were all in on airsoft and they never touched World War II reenacting or never really touched real guns. Like I said, like I kind of varied in each of those. So like I did World War II reenacting, I did movie car collecting stuff, I did toy collecting stuff, I did the filmmaking stuff, then I did the gaming stuff, then I did the airsoft stuff, then I did the real gun stuff. That was like all my world. And I did a little bit of cosplay stuff, but it was all kind of like similar to all that. So like my world at any one time, like especially when I was a little bit younger, was like doing all those at once. It was really wild. Um, and
Awesome.
it's like one weekend I'd be doing like a World War II reenacting thing at like Fort MacArthur. Then the next weekend I'm at an airsoft milsim thing, and then the next weekend I'm at the range, and the next weekend I'm like doing like something else or a video game thing. And it was like, I mean, LA was just like go 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 go. There was always something to do within one of those spaces. It slowed down a little bit now, which I'm kind of happy because man, I'd be like exhausted. But World
Right.
War II reenacting was cool just because it really re-sparked my appreciation for history and for authenticity,
Right.
and really got me good at how to research stuff, because that skill to learn how to research stuff for my reenacting came in handy for the filmmaking stuff and for the other stuff, because it'd be like, hey,
Mhm.
what about this era, and like go research it, and like either I already knew it or I could find the information really well. So that's kind of like all that stuff ended up coming in handy, just from exploring those hobbies. And I think to avoid getting burned out at any one of those hobbies, I ended up doing a bunch of hobbies at the same time, which was
Mhm.
expensive and took up a lot of time. But
Right.
it kind of helped me keep me from getting burned out on my main hobby so much.
Yeah.
So I still had love for all the hobbies because I was like still having fun with all of them. I wasn't doing any one of them so full time that I didn't want to do it anymore. Where there's some people that I knew who got into airsoft when I started who aren't doing it anymore. So for me, it's like kind of balancing that out. I mean, I'm not saying that's like the right way to go about life, but I just managed to diversify my interests enough so that way I still pretty much like, I mean, I might not do all of them, but I still appreciate and love all those to this day. Um, yeah.
That's wonderful and very well articulated. I recently have been appreciating, I think this is like the theme of my 25th year of life, of appreciating the perspective we gain from being diverse
Hmm.
and how it brings attention to the why behind everything we do. And it makes the completion of tasks, the training, everything just more enjoyable and deeper. So I love that you're bringing awareness to that. I think it's incredible that athletes, they specify in something. Or what am I trying to say? They specialize in something. It's getting late. It's like really
Yeah.
late for anyone listening. It's like 9:40 Central over here. So don't judge me. But yeah, they specialize in one thing, and they have that deep. I like that you
It's like
kind of put it in the
their specialty is
analogy.
narrow, but it's very deep. versus
Yes, I love
like
that. Good
versus like
analogy.
shallow and wide. And some people are a little more
Yes.
well-rounded, where it's like some people, like my boss Travis Haley, he like in terms of what he knows, his skill sets and his knowledge, he is both like he's able to like he has very in-depth knowledge, but the areas that he's a subject matter expertise in is very wide. It's hard to
Right.
find people like that have wide field of knowledge, but in each of those fields, it's either fairly deep or like very in depth.
Right.
Like some historians will like they'll spend their whole lives mastering this one whole era,
Right.
or people with like a certain hobby or something. So and even in the gun industry, you'll find like there's some instructors that like they know how to shoot, but they don't know any of the gear or gear history or anything like that. But they know how to shoot, but like that's like their thing. But it's very
Right.
interesting because then there's some people that they know all the history, but they don't know how to shoot. And then there's some people that know a little bit of everything. So I try to be
Right.
more in the little bit of everything, or as much as I can to be a little more diversified.
Right.
Because I don't want to be that guy that like doesn't know about that one thing or this thing or that other. I just like love learning about that stuff. Um,
Yes.
yeah, no, it's really hard to find people whose skill sets are wide and deep at the same time. Because like I can shoot, I could run a camera, like there's even that is like those are two completely different skill sets. Some people can only shoot. Some people can only run a camera. I can film, I can edit, I can do like, I mean, not the best at it, but at least I'm like very familiar with like cameras and lighting and stuff like that, to where I
Yes.
can both be on-screen talent, but I can also know how to be behind the camera as well, which not a lot of people
Yeah.
know how to do that. They usually can be just be one or the other. And for me, I enjoy it because when I create my own content, I know what the behind the scenes process is. So when I work with my like film crew or my camera guy, I can tell him exactly what I want, and I can speak the camera guy language while doing what the talent on screen needs to do. Like, oh, my
Right.
reload needs to be like this or whatever. And it's like, I don't have to worry as much about what's going on behind the camera because I'm very familiar with all the settings on his camera, what he's doing, the frame rate, the color grading, everything that he's doing and how it's going to look, the lens and the how fast the lens is and the depth of field. That way I know it's going to look good because I know what's going on. Now I just have to focus on what I'm actually doing. So that's kind of how I
Right.
approach it. There's surprisingly not a lot of people that are good on both sides of it. Like, it's just another one of those things that's like a learned thing. So, I mean, yeah, so that's just another way I think people could be better at is like being able to master both sides of like, that's just one aspect, being in front of the camera, being behind the camera. That's a good thing to learn both sides. Shooting is
Yes.
just another thing where there's so many different things you can master. So, um,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why like I've stuck around so long and done so well is because I've mastered,
Yeah.
mastered some things, but got very good or learned enough about a bunch of different skill sets or things like that, whether it's shooting or camera work or history or knowledge and stuff like that. So I think that's why
Yeah.
like that's kind of why I do what I do a little bit and kind of how I've stuck around.
That's incredible. And funny enough, as you're talking, I'm realizing my camera is like slanted. Like, talk about learning how to be behind the camera. That's definitely a skill that I've had to learn. We were talking before the show, but I just got my Sony FX30 because Livefire was like, yeah, we're gonna need high quality stuff, and I was like, oh, then please get me a camera, and they did. So I have that set up, but I'm like looking at it right now and it's totally slanted. Like, I don't know if you can tell, but
I
gonna have
honestly
to fix
I
that.
can't really tell because I can't see where
Okay, that's
I
good.
can't really see where the horizon is to be able to tell whether it's slanted or
Okay.
not. But I mean, people can
Haha,
like
that was on
even
purpose.
just a quick little tidbit on camera stuff. It's
Yeah.
like I have a Sony ZV-E1 that I use for my run and gun camera. It's probably one of the best. It has the same sensor as the FX3 or the FX30. Because is yours an APS-C sensor or a
I can't answer
so
that,
so
but it is
maybe
the smaller one.
okay, so APS-C is the smaller one, and then
Yeah.
full frame. So the FX3 would have the full frame. It's like basically like a budget cinema camera, if you will. I have a
Yes.
Sony ZV-E1, which is even cheaper than that, but it has the same sensor and the same brains as all the more expensive cameras. It's perfect for YouTube, for run and gun. But then, like the camera that I'm using right now, I'm using a Sony ZV-E10, which it's only like
Yeah.
$1,000 camera, but I've got a prime lens, which is basically just what a prime lens is basically just it's a piece of glass, but instead of having two pieces of glasses, like most 24 to 70, like a lens that can like adjust on the fly and like go from like a wide angle to like telephoto, kind of zoom in a little bit. That's going to have multiple layers of glass in it, so the clarity of the glass is still going to be good, but prime lenses are just really fantastic. So like the setup that I'm using is only like $1,200-$1,300 really. It's just like a
Nice.
camera
Okay.
so and you can get really great quality because what you'll find is you need good base quality with the lens and the camera setup, and this happens to be a great streaming camera, but then lighting is like the other like 50-60%. I mean, you and I were just talking about the same YouTube channel we both watched and learn about
Yeah.
that. Lighting makes a
Yes.
huge difference in terms of how
Huge.
the set, I mean, it's like set dressing, lighting, all that stuff. Like, I mean, coming from the filmmaking side, I'm fascinated by that stuff. So it took me a year to kind of build this set, fine tune the lightings, pick what colors I wanted to use, pick the
Yeah.
positions. Like I experimented with a lot of different positions for lights, where I was going to place them, how I was going to use them, what softbox I need to use. Like my softbox is only like 50 to 80 bucks. It's a pretty cheap softbox in
Nice.
terms of like
Okay.
filmmaking land because you can get
Yeah.
$300-$400 apertures and AMRANs all day long. Um,
Right.
so just like for me, I'm also fascinated by the filmmaking side. Like the film is like, if it wasn't for guns and gear, my second love is filmmaking. Like, huge Star Wars fan, huge Jurassic Park fan. I drive a Jurassic Park Jeep. Like
That's awesome.
film and creation and like all my other hobbies are the two things that go together. I have a huge Star Wars collection. I actually had one of the guys who plays the Mandalorian come and check it out like a couple months ago.
What? Okay,
Yeah,
that's
look
awesome.
up Brendan Wayne. He's the guy who
Okay.
wears the Mandalorian suit on the show. He's like 90% the Mandalorian, and the other stunt guys are like the 9%, and then Pedro's like the voice. And like
Right, right.
he only does like a day or two on any of the seasons. But filmmaking is my other passion, which is why, like when I was talking about the whole Christopher Nolan thing before, I was so fascinated with how movies are made and being able to work on them and seeing the masters doing it in person, making the movie and knowing that I'm going to see this in like a year and like seeing what their vision was. So, um, that's how I learned all this stuff. It's like I was super passionate about filmmaking and video games and guns, and then kind of learn how to use a camera, learn how to edit, and learn how to do everything else. And that's kind of how my channel and my content was born. It was the love of all those things coming together, which surprisingly to this day, I wonder why there's people like there's still a lot of people out here that haven't managed to bring those together as well. There's still a lot of people that have,
Yeah.
but yeah, just a lot of my peers in the space that I've been making content with for a long time. They've just really focused on one thing and they haven't really crossed into the other. So I don't know. That's kind of how I
Yeah.
approach it. And I love filmmaking. It's like my second love, and that's kind of how I built all this. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think a lot of it is just speaking from someone who has been so nervous to branch out into combatives because I feel like such a fraud. I have my blue belt in jiu-jitsu. I trained Muay Thai. I've done everything from like that to wrestling, Krav Maga, and I have my black belt in a Korean style martial arts.
Hmm.
But my whole life still, even with all that, because I'm not cage fighting and like actively signing up for MMA fights, I'm like, I don't deserve to speak on this. So I think a lot of it is like imposter syndrome. Just, I think
Yeah.
my perspective on that, at least, I'm sure there's a lot
Yeah,
of other
I
things
could
that I
see
can't
that,
think
but I
of.
think as long as you're still sparring and doing that stuff like within your
I
local
am.
training sessions, like
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't
With
say
a
you would.
helmet.
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't say like you'd necessarily have full on imposter syndrome or anything like that. Just because like if
Sure.
you when you think about it, the people who are doing those cage fightings are like that is what they do. They are professional fighters. Their whole job, they make their living beating people up and getting beat up.
Yeah. I
So it's
wanted to
like
do that,
it's
but
like and it's kind of like with guns. It's like not every single person that carries a gun his whole livelihood is about just destroying other people or potentially being destroyed. Obviously, there's people that do that for a living too, but even then, there's a lot of people in the military that their whole job is to fight, but they are still not
right.
the masters of shooting. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like
Yes.
they're all different aspects of things. But I think it's cool, just like how I take a holistic view of training with different firearms or different techniques or different genres. You take a more holistic view with training by studying different disciplines of fighting because every discipline has its ups and downs. And of course, we've seen some disciplines grow in popularity because they're so utilitarian or can be fused or melded with other fighting styles. But it's like, like if you only practice one fighting style, you're going to have all the strengths and all the weaknesses of that one fighting style. Versus if you practiced a wide
Absolutely.
variety, you're going to have the strengths and advantages of both. And when your opponent switches between fighting styles, you'll be able to adapt as well, whether it's fighting a style that counters that one really well, or all the techniques that they're going to have or whatnot. So I think it's good to have a holistic view no matter what you're doing, whether it's fighting, driving, training, art, music, whatever. Yeah.
I love that. Oh my God, thank you so much. I just added a lens to my perspectacles. So yeah, no, that's lovely. That's lovely. Well, I got to ask everything I wanted to ask. I mean, I'm sure later I'll be like, damn it, why didn't I ask this? But um as far as kind of concluding the episode, something unless you have anything else you want to say, which I'm so down for.
I think
Um
we covered a pretty good gamut, so I'm just happy to be here.
oh my gosh, I'm so happy you're here. And if later you're like, damn it, I wanted to talk about this part two, I don't know, you let me know.
Sure.
But as far as anything you would like to kind of leave the listener with, which I feel like there were so many just golden nuggets throughout this episode, but is there anything you would like to kind of send everyone off with today?
I mean, like, I'm trying to think. Like, one thing that I say in a lot of my videos, more so on the YouTube channel than like on Instagram, is like,
Mhm.
It kind of goes back to the whole real steel airsoft thing. It's like, hey, if you're a gun guy, try airsoft, try some of those other forms of force on force. If you're an airsoft guy and you've only done force on force, try real steel. We're both part of the same community, if you will, extended
Yeah.
community in some parts, but we both support the Constitution, and we're both part of that big movement of just preserving and restoring our rights. For me, that's like a big thing these days. It's like just
Yeah.
educating people on what their rights actually are, and like, it's honestly hard, like, even for us working in the gun industry, it's hard to fathom how widely we're being attacked every day unless you go to like Gun Owners of America or Gun Policy and look at all the cases they have ongoing in all the states. It's like, man, I did not know there was this many cases going on where we're actively being like attacked, and it's kind of crazy. All we want to do is just live as free citizens, restore our rights, and I think it's the more people get exposed to firearms and education, the better. The only reason people have an aversion to firearms now is because they probably didn't grow up with it. Their only exposure
Mm.
to it is with pop culture, and the reason is because just throughout history inherently, I guess, taught ourselves we don't need guns anymore because we're a civilized society, and through that, people have become less educated, which has actually made them more dangerous with guns. Um,
Yes,
that,
absolutely.
and then there's the other part of it too, is back in the day, gun ownership was a duty. Like if you were in the 1800s, you were like part of a militia because that was necessary for the country to be free. But once we really started leaning on an active military for our safety and security, gun ownership really didn't play so much into the national defense or security of the nation. So it became less of a duty and more a thing you did either just for personal self-defense or for fun. And now, because society is so much safer to a degree, like we still need guns for self-defense, but more people typically use guns for fun or for training than they do as a duty to protect the nation or to protect their property per se. Like, there's
Mm.
still a lot of self-defense cases, but typically when
Right.
you think of people buying guns, they're buying them because they like them, not because they need them, versus back in
Right.
the day. And so that's kind of that natural evolution, is we need to remind people of their duty
Mm.
to protect the nation, not just themselves, because everyone always remembers to protect themselves, but their duty to be an armed society is a free society. And because we've forgotten about that, to us, guns have kind of become more of an indulgence than a duty per se. There's a great documentary about it, even though they kind of like had some weird angles about it. Like this guy, he's got a YouTube channel where he did this documentary on why gun culture in Switzerland is different than here. Yes, they have more regulations and some weird laws, but it's kind of a weird, different asymmetry because we have more access to guns here, but we have like our culture is really weird, and there's a lot of gun laws that we're fighting. They have some strict gun laws there, but every family has a military issued assault rifle that you take home from the service with you. Like it's not a like it's a full auto, AR basically, or SIG rifle or something like that, or Swiss rifle. So it's like it's different because they're similar but different, and they almost have like, when we do like our county fairs over there, they do them over there, but they're shooting competitions. So why is it different? It's just because we've been out of touch with the duty aspect of firearms ownership, and it's become more of an indulgence. So we're in a struggle in our own country right now to re-educate the population on what it means to own guns and what the duty really is. And we're just fighting a political slash media war on what guns really mean to the country. Where it's like people are like, that's kind of where we're at right now. So I'm part of that movement where I'm trying
Yeah.
to re-educate people, show positive firearms exposure, use, whether it's in video games and media or airsoft, get people into it. Because we're in that process where like sometimes you got to gradually get people into it. You can't just get them straight to a gun range and expect they're going to be comfortable. Sometimes you got to
Right.
gradually get them accustomed to it through media, through Instagram, social media, and video games and whatnot, and then eventually get them to the gun range. Sometimes that's more effective playing the long game than playing the short game. So I know some people are playing the long game, but we still need people who play the short game, who are on the political battlefield, who are advocating for restoring our rights and stuff like that, or educating people about what's going on in the country. That's the short game. We still need to win those short-term battles if we're ever going to win the long-term one. But we still also need to win the long-term one where we're positively educating and entertaining people and just getting them comfortable with firearms before just taking someone brand new who's never shot before, putting them on the range and expecting them to be very comfortable. If they have a bad experience, if anything, that'll make it worse. So
Absolutely.
that's kind of my thoughts on that. So that's my kind of closing thoughts on that, where we are as a country and where we're going and what we kind of need to do to get people more familiar and comfortable with guns so that we're a free nation again. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that was beautifully said. If I didn't know any better, I would think that was just straight up rehearsed. So thank you so much for sharing that. And that's something that we talked a little bit before the show, but for the listeners, that's something I struggle with my page. I want to be available for everyone. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm, shoving beliefs down their throat. And I want to be a page that everyone can come to. And I'm starting to realize that I can still advocate for the Second Amendment, right to bear arms, right to protect ourselves against the tyrannical government, all of that, um, and still be
Yeah.
representative of everyone. So I'm starting to do that, and the
Yeah.
way I'm doing it is going to be subtle, but at first. But and part of that is just me educating myself. I'm not going to lie to
Yeah.
you, like I need to. A lot of it goes back to that imposter syndrome. This is the same reason I feel apprehensive towards sharing my combatives journey. I sometimes don't feel like I know enough. If I was challenged, would I be able to come back? So I appreciate people like you that are trying to educate the
Yeah.
public.
I think if you
Yeah.
approach it as like an almost always the student kind of thing,
Yeah.
you have to be able to speak on experience that you have, but you also have to speak from a position that like you don't know everything and you're still learning in that space and willing to learn. Because
Absolutely.
I mean, even when it comes to filmmaking, I have not mastered that. I'm trying to master it. My goal is to master it, but it's like, I mean, that's the pursuit of excellence, and mastery is what makes you better anyways. As the boss says, and I can't remember if he got it from somewhere in particular, but you'll never be perfect. You'll never be like necessarily, you can always strive to be the best at one thing. And who knows, one day you might, in the pursuit of that excellence of trying to be the best, you might end up being the best. It is quite possible. Like, Elon Musk is the richest guy in the world. Maybe he didn't plan on it, but in the pursuit of trying to make money and building a better future for humanity, the byproduct was him becoming the richest guy in the world or owning Twitter or whatever, right? Sometimes those anomalies do happen, but I think for the average person, if you're just in the pursuit of excellence, even though you might not be the best at that, eventually you will become so good at whatever that is that you will be speaking from a position of authority, even if you didn't even intend to it. It'll just be a byproduct of that journey of trying to become excellent. You know what I'm saying? I'm
Yes.
not the best shooter. I'm not the biggest airsoft milsimer. I'm not the best camera guy or whatever, but I've pursued those things enough in depth where I'll at least share my experience and my knowledge on them. And even though I'm not truly the master yet, I'm willing
Right.
to acknowledge that I've still learned a decent amount in those spaces, and I'm still learning. But it's like, you'll eventually get good at those things too, and acknowledging that you've come so far. So that's how I would approach it. And in terms of like the
I
Second
love that.
Amendment, the way I approach it is where the Second Amendment is, Constitution applies to everybody. If anyone has an issue with you just advocating for restoring our rights in the Constitution, I mean, every single one of your viewers that lives in America, Constitution applies to. Like, I don't really see anything bad about advocating for having their rights restored and maintained. That's how I
Right.
would approach it. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
I love that. Seriously, wonderfully said. And anytime I struggle with that, I will come back to this
Sure.
episode. I feel almost so like selfish in a positive way being a podcast host because I get to take all these incredible,
Yeah, perspectives and
experiences and perspectives. Yes, it's truly the best thing I ever did starting this podcast. So thank you so much for being part of it.
oh yeah, thank you for
I'm so
having
glad
me.
I got to
Yeah.
see. Oh my gosh, absolutely! I'm so glad I got to see you at SHOT Show 2024, and then maybe at SHOT Show 2025 if you'd like to get together, we can
Yeah.
actually like see each other. But I'm sure there'll be something we come together at. I'm going to so many like various events this year just out of the blue, got invited to a bunch of things
Yeah.
gratefully, so I'm
Come out to
sure we'll run
Arizona,
into
do
each
some
other. I
training. You
want to
can
so
train with
bad.
us.
Is
You
it
can train
Brittany?
with Brittany. Like, we got a whole posse
Yes.
of gun people out here. You'd be in like kind of like one of the gun hotspots in the country. I think Texas is one. this is the other, and Georgia's kind of the other one, but like a lot of the people
Okay.
are out here in Arizona. It's a very constitutional carry state. You can carry a gun wherever you want with you, and it's just nice to have a state that just acknowledges your right to just exercise your rights. Period. Because last couple of years has
Yes.
been rough for everybody, so it's just nice to live somewhere where
Yes.
you can just be you and exercise the things that you love and that you've literally been given by the
Right.
country that you live in. We pay taxes. It's the least we could do.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I got to hang out with Angelo
Yeah.
and along with Brittany, of course, and um, a few other people that were just incredible. Their group of friends, they're just so welcoming, and they let me be part of their group during SHOT. So I definitely want to visit them. So I will make a trip, and so many people to see, which
Oh
is
yeah,
I'm so thankful
it's
for
the
that.
hardest part about SHOT Show is seeing everybody. But at least if
Seeing
you come out here,
everyone.
you can kind of have a little bit more like curated time with all the people that you want to see. It's tough at SHOT Show because it's a madhouse. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I felt really bad. I messaged a few people and I was like, "Oh my god, I don't know how I missed you. I'm so sorry." And they were like, "No, I'm in the same boat. I missed you too. Like
Yeah.
it is a busy time." So everyone I feel like understands that. It's just my second one, so when I missed people, I felt really bad. But yeah, thank you for sharing that too. For
Oh
anyone
yeah, yeah,
listening that maybe wants to go to SHOT, like that's how it is. So get ready.
yeah.
um but yes, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for taking your time out of your Friday night.
Oh yeah, yeah.
This was an incredible conversation. So I can't wait for more if you're ever willing. I'll probably listen back to this and think of a few things we could maybe go into depth on a little bit more. But thank you so much, seriously. I will link all of your social content, Greg, in the show notes, which are the notes below the title. So anyone listening wanting to see that stellar high quality content, which I can vet because I went and looked at it and I was very impressed, can do that now. All of your socials, anything you mentioned in the episode will be linked in the show notes. For those listening who wants exclusive content, you can join the Patreon and visit the She Shield Instagram and TikTok for show highlights. Our incredible team member Lisa makes those highlights for all of you to enjoy. Although it is so worth it to listen to the whole episode, we can never truly capture everything. But speaking of capturing everything, the YouTube video version of this episode will be available full length. So please go check out our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button and notification button. If you like the podcast, you could also help by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review on Spotify. For me, that's just that 5-star review at the very top. It takes 2 seconds to do. If you would have time to do that today, please do that. We have 30 reviews on Spotify, so trying to get that number increased. If you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis, look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization that will connect you with a local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you. The link to access their website and find a storage location partner is available in the show notes. Thank you for listening. In the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant.